Chapter 241, Bad News. One late February morning, cold enough to bite through the castle walls, Sagres was in the middle of a lecture when a dust-caked barn owl crashed through the open window and dropped a thick letter onto his lectern. Inside the envelope were two sheets of parchment, one stamped with the austere crest of the Moldova Ministry of Magic, the other in the familiar scrawl signed Stork. Sagres shooed the owl away, and under the students' curious stares he unfolded the letter. The message was blunt and merciless. A brilliant Ravenclaw who had graduated from Hogwarts the previous year, a student noted for exceptional skill in transfiguration, had been killed while investigating dark arts artifact smuggling near the Moldova border. The murderer was a notorious exiled dark wizard. The report described the scene in clinical, gruesome detail. The student had not fallen in a clean duel, but had been taken by surprise, tortured until his mind broke under a Cruciatus Curse, and finally ended with an indiscriminate killing curse. Sagres finished reading in silence, his fingertips lingering on the rough parchment. Outside, the winter sun was thin and pale. Such a promising life, a Hogwarts prodigy, had been wiped out because of a single lapse. He raised his head slowly and looked over the faces before him. Wide-eyed first-years, bewildered middlers, hardening seventh-years. A hush settled, heavy as frost. After a moment, he made his decision. "Today we will not be covering Incendio," he said. The students exchanged puzzled, apprehensive looks as his expression darkened. "For the next few lessons, we will hold special theoretical lectures, high-risk dark arts identification, and basic defensive strategies. Attendance is mandatory." The words landed like a cold stone. Confusion, fear, and unease flickered across faces. Sagres did not leave them to panic. He met their eyes and spoke steadily. "A few days ago, Hogwarts lost a graduate from last year," he said. "His name was Aurorus Alcott. Many of you will remember him. He represented Hogwarts in the Tri-Wizard duel." "Senior Aurorus," a whisper rose. "It's him?" Gasps spread through the room. Aurorus Alcott had been a member of the Transfiguration Club. His poise and skill in the arena lingered in many minds. Sagres's next words landed like a hammer. "He died in Moldova. The report says he was taken by a dark wizard who used extreme methods. He had insufficient awareness of the tactics his opponent used." A stunned silence followed. Some Ravenclaws could not hold back quiet sobs. Sagres's voice was harsh with truth. "His death is a failing in Hogwarts education. We taught you spells, transfiguration, charms, and potions, but we did not prepare you to face true darkness. This series of lessons is meant to address that. This is not about giving you power. It's about giving you the knowledge to survive." He did not linger on rhetoric. He moved straight to the core of the lesson. "First, 3 spells you have read about, but probably never appreciated at full force. The so-called unforgivable curses, as defined by the International Confederation of Wizards." He listed them crisply. Killing Curse, Eternal Death. Imperio, Absolute Control. Cruciatus, Excruciating Pain. Before any of them could react fully, Sagres's wand rose. A sickly green flash, cold as tombstone marble, bloomed from its tip, slicing through the air. The room seemed to lean away. Faces went ashen. "The Killing Curse," Sagres said, voice flat, "is unstoppable by counterspell, pure lethal intent. Defensive points never stand still. Use terrain and obstacles to break line of sight and anticipate the spell's trajectory. Your only objective is survival, escape, and seek help. There is no shame in that." The green light had scarcely faded when a distorted crimson flare followed. Neville paled and trembled as if old wounds had been opened. "The Cruciatus," Sagres went on, "inflicts unbearable pain meant to crush the will. Its effectiveness comes from the caster's malice and the victim's fear. Protego can blunt the force, buying a breath of time. More crucial is the victim's willpower. Anchor yourself in a resolute memory or belief. That will not stop the pain, but it can restore function and buy opportunity for escape." The crimson ebbing left the air heavy and metallic. From Sagres's wand, a thin, almost imperceptible mist flowed next, transparent and insidious. It swept the classroom like a living thing, pressing at thoughts and making heads swim. Several students blinked, fingers going automatically to their temples. "Imperio," Sagres said with grave calm, "takes away agency. It is the most insidious. Resist it by cultivating a strong mental barrier, stubborn self-identity, and the repeated readiness to say no. Vigilance in everyday life is essential. Do not indulge intrusive suggestions from strangers, magical or otherwise. The demonstration of the three signature evils left the room tense, as if a storm had passed through. Sargeras did not stop there. Dark wizards do not rely on only three methods, he said. They have a catalog of lethal magics. You must recognize them and know how to respond. He flicked his wand. A twisted coil of dark red fire materialized and hissed like a living thing, snapping at an illusory figure and turning it to ash on contact. Fiend fire, he said. Highly destructive, nearly uncontrollable magical flame. Aguamenti is not only ineffective, it can strengthen the conflagration. Avoid direct engagement. Unless several very powerful witches or wizards combine their efforts, apparition and withdrawal are the safest options. A bright yellow beam followed, slamming into a piece of chalk and detonating it into a white puff. Bombarda, he said. You've seen it in dueling arenas. It's loud and spectacular, and up close it can maim or kill. Defend with protego or impedimenta, if possible, but above all, keep distance from the blast. Next came a silent, dark green fog smelling faintly of rot, seeping into a corner of the lectern. Corrosive poison mist, Sargeras explained. A caustic, paralyzing gas that can dissolve flesh. Bubblehead charm is the basic defense. Scouring charms or a strong stream of water can dilute and disperse it. If someone is exposed, a general antidote will buy time, but is not a cure-all. He sighed and formed another shape, a whirling pitch-black orb of spell light that felt malevolent to the bone. Bone rot curse, he said. The victim's skin will crack with black fissures, bones become brittle and may shatter. Protego will block it, impedimenta will not. Use solid cover to avoid contact. A faint, piercing keening then sounded, like a wind that carried voices. Soul wail, Sargeras named it. A shriek that can send listeners' bodies rigid while their consciousness drifts among lost things. It's effective against ghosts and is used to sow confusion before an attack. Counters are straightforward. Muffliato can lessen the effect, and silencio, or a quietening charm, can suppress it entirely. The list could have gone on, but the point was made. The darkness was inventive and brutal. He let the last echo die away and then spoke to the faces around him, now tight with fear and concentration. These are examples, not an exhaustive inventory. The key is recognition, immediate appropriate response, and the will to survive. Learn Protego well. Practice silent escape routes. Carry a basic antidote when entering dangerous zones. Temper your willpower. Trust your instincts. And when you are outmatched, don't try to be a hero alone. Run, signal for help, and live to fight another day. A low murmur ran through the room. Some students trembled. Others sat rigidly, storing every word. Sargeras folded his hands, eyes suddenly softer as they met the Ravenclaws who had been crying. We will notify Aurorus Alcott's family through the proper channels, he said quietly, and we will honor him by ensuring no one else comes here unprepared. He concluded with the practical note that had started the session. Attendance at these special lectures is not optional. The next classes will include both theory and drills. We will practice mental resistance, protective spells, first aid for magical injuries, and rapid evacuation techniques. If any of you has questions you are reluctant to ask in public, come see me after class. Silence held for a long breath. Then the students began to file out, moving like a flock unsettled by a distant hawk. They left with heavier steps than they had arrived with, carrying a new, urgent awareness of the danger beyond the castle gates, and of how much more there was to learn in order simply to survive. Chapter 242, Endless Debate. Each demonstration of high-risk magic was accompanied by Sargeras's calm, almost cruel explanation. The students watched with pale faces and clammy hands, but something heavier and more urgent was taking hold in their eyes, a thirst for knowledge ignited by harsh truth. The ferocious fangs and deadly shadows beneath the dazzling facade of the magical world and the vast gaps in their own understanding had been laid bare. Fear comes from the unknown, Sargeras concluded. What I showed you today are some of the known beasts in the dark. I taught you their habits, their claws, their weaknesses. Not so you can hunt them, but so that when you meet them by misfortune, he paused, his gaze sweeping the room. You will have an extra measure of vigilance, an extra measure of courage to struggle, and an extra measure of possibility to survive. He emphasized, People say the dark arts corrupt the soul and that pursuing their power will lead to self-destruction, but only by understanding an enemy's weapons can you better protect yourselves. The bell rang, but the classroom stayed silent. Class dismissed, Sargeras said, waving his hand. One more thing. Aside from the defensive spells I mentioned today, you are forbidden to discuss the details of the unforgivable curses privately, and practicing them is strictly prohibited. The students rose and left in heavy silence. No one spoke. Sargeras stayed alone at the empty podium, twilight pooling against the window. He knew this lesson would cause an uproar, but he was even clearer that the loss of a young life had already proved the foolishness of burying one's head in the sand. He needed these future wizards to open their eyes. Only then could they avoid withering away like that Ravenclaw graduate because of a tiny oversight when the real storm came. Professor McGonagall appeared in the doorway at some point, her expression equally solemn, her eyes behind her glasses filled with deep sorrow. Albus, he already knows. He understands your intention. But Sargeras, the Ministry of Magic. Whoever it is, tell them to come find me, Sargeras replied evenly. He calmly put away his textbook. If the price of making students face reality is bearing everyone's blame, I will not shy away. Even if it meant being called a Dark Lord. The shock caused by this subversive lesson far exceeded everyone's expectations. The students clustered in small groups, whispering, and the talk spread faster than any new adventure. For the first time, the long tables in the Great Hall lost their house boundaries. Robes of different colors tangled together as never before over the same topic. He actually showed all those spells. Ron's face was still pale. He clutched a half-eaten pie as if it were a talisman. Green light, red light, all those colorful spells, right there in the classroom. But the professor is right, Hermione said seriously. If we've never seen them, how can we possibly know how to deal with them? Hermione's right. Harry took over. Even though the chill when the green light flashed still sat fresh in his memory, he agreed. Think about Auroras. Everyone fell silent for a moment. I also think Professor Greengrass is right, Ginny said suddenly, her tone unusually firm. She remembered being controlled by Riddle's diary in her first year. Ignorance won't protect us. It'll only make us more vulnerable when danger strikes. Understanding is a kind of defense. Fred and George were uncharacteristically serious. Like if you meet Fiendfire, you should turn and run. It's that simple. Fred stroked his chin. George nodded. And that soul whale? Cover your ears? Maybe we could invent a little contraption that plugs your ears instantly. Percy sat a little apart, brow furrowed. But this isn't in accordance with the rules. All eyes turned to him. He continued, this violates Article 37 of the Restrictions on Dark Arts Education Act, which states that demonstrating and thoroughly explaining the 3 unforgivable curses and other high-risk dark arts to students creates panic and severely harms the psychological well-being of underage wizards. He hesitated. And how can the professor guarantee that no student will privately— Oh, come on, Percy, Ron snapped. Are we going to stay safe by pretending these things don't exist? Or are you going to guarantee there won't be another Auroras? Percy opened his mouth, then fell silent. Ron added quietly, and I'm sure if anyone dares to practice those things and use them on others, Professor Greengrass will be the first to stop them. Nearby, Cho Chang leaned toward Cedric, worry written on her face. Do you think this was wise? Those spells, knowing they exist, makes people even more uneasy. Cedric's expression was solemn. Fear is natural, Cho, but Professor Greengrass is right. Fear comes from the unknown. Before, we only saw names in books. Now we at least know what they look like and how dark wizards might use them. It's like seeing a trap beforehand. It's frightening, but at least we know where to hide. He fell quiet. Think about Auroras. He might have lacked that little bit of foresight. As he spoke, his voice dropped even lower. He could have had a chance. Another Ravenclaw senior pushed up his glasses and joined in. And the professor broadened the practical uses of many defensive spells. The swooping evil can do more than clean classrooms. It can disperse poisonous fog. The bubblehead charm isn't just for breathing underwater. It can be a basic barrier. He connected textbook knowledge with life and death combat. That's invaluable. At the Slytherin table, Pansy Parkinson, overhearing the debates, couldn't help but shout, If you ask me, he's inciting panic. He should be reported to the ministry, suspended, prosecuted." "But every word he said was the truth," Draco Malfoy replied coldly. "Danger doesn't stop existing if you bury your head in the sand." He snorted. "Avoiding problems doesn't solve them. It only adds another grave to your family's cemetery." His words struck Pansy dumb. She shrank back, indignant but silenced. "You just wait," she huffed weakly. "The ministry won't let him off." "So what?" Malfoy sneered, a cold glint in his eyes. "The fact that he dares to do this proves he isn't afraid." Deep down, Sargeras's line, "Survival is the only goal," struck a chord with him, echoing Lucius Malfoy's frequent lessons about the Slytherin way to survive. Chapter 243, New Achievements. Over the past 2 days, Sargeras's special lectures had subjected every student from 1st to 7th year to a brutal, comprehensive baptism in the dark side of the magical world. To everyone's surprise, the fierce opposition many expected from inside the school and interference from the Ministry of Magic never came. A strange calm settled over the castle. The professors kept a tacit silence. Even Filch, for once, didn't pester any students. Sargeras understood that calm. The ministry's silence was less consent than cowardice. Cornelius Fudge might be foolish, but he knew well enough that openly confronting Sargeras now would be unwise. Dumbledore's own silence was also a signal. That brief lull gave Sargeras precious time to work. On one hand, he refined the ruin exploration instance with input from the other professors. On the other, a bolder, more shocking idea took shape in his mind: real combat sparring. Puppets and simulated environments could never match the cunning and cruelty of living enemies. Students needed to face opponents who could think, deceive, and fight to the death. But bringing in real dark wizards, even captured ones, was far too risky. He needed something perfectly controllable, yet extraordinarily realistic. Thus he conceived an innovative magic, memory projection. The basic idea was to divert and load into the dual monument fragments of dark wizards from his own memory bank. The magic's core challenge was precisely extracting complete fragments of deceased dark wizards. Their appearance, magical signatures, fighting styles, favorite curses, even the bone-deep killing intent and guile. He would then shape those memory fragments with magic and fuse them into the instance to create highly faithful memory projections, or mirror projections. These projections, made of memory and magic, would be neither ghost nor true being. They would have no independent consciousness, only programs driven by Sargeras's recollections of their behaviors. On the arena, they would replicate the original's fighting style perfectly, cast dangerous spells, and simulate insidious cunning, giving students a genuine sense of pressure and combat experience. Most importantly, they could not inflict real harm. The arena's protection mechanism would judge attacks, and anything considered fatal or disabling would trigger an automatic teleport to remove the student from the arena. It would be combat that felt real, but could not kill. As a former dark wizard hunter, Sargeras had countless samples stored in his memory: low-level thugs who used crude dark arts and physical violence, seasoned villains adept in curses and tricks, and the very dangerous, extremely vicious ones. All would make invaluable practical training materials. Practice is the best teacher, and death the harshest lesson, especially when it only happens in an illusion. This seemed the fastest way to turn sheltered students into warriors. But building such a magic was far from simple. It required memory magic, soul magic, shaping, and ancient runes, an intellectual and mental strain. A flash of temptation crossed his mind. Should he hunt down living dark wizards to recharge? He discarded the idea. No matter how complex the task, he wasn't without clues. The golden finger was useful, but he needed restraint. He did not want to become another cautionary tale like Amon Blade. So after his daily lessons, he retreated to the library. Thanks to the other professor's help, the ruin instance grew steadily better. He refused Professor Snape's suggestion for a full moon limited challenge because Snape personal motives. Snape proposed an exercise open only on full moon nights in which students would brew a wolfsbane potion for Lupin. That wasn't meant to be a serious teaching exercise. Wolfsbane was exceedingly difficult, and only a few witches and wizards could brew it. Snape was merely trying to annoy Lupin. Sargeras declined without anger. Snape might have been testing his luck, but Sargeras had no interest. The restricted section became his second office. Progress was slow, precisely extracting recognizable individuals from the river of his memories and keeping the integrity of their magical imprint was like performing microsurgery with magic. Then he had to bind those imprints to stable rune structures and inject them into the dual arena's control core. For a month he made attempt after attempt. Most only made the edge runes flare faintly. Once he produced a blurry, distorted dark shape that solidified for a few seconds before dissipating, sending several passing students fleeing in terror. Rumors of hauntings spread across campus, but that was hardly unusual in a place where students faced ghosts regularly. Sagres didn't mind the failures or the frightened looks. Every backlash was data, parameters to adjust the next rune sequence. Finally, on a pre-dawn morning, when the last complex rune set was engraved into the arena's control core, the monument hummed. A figure began to congeal in the arena, gradually taking shape and radiating a cold, realistic killing intent. It worked. He had taken a shortcut. Rather than inventing a complete new branch of magic, he solved most problems with runes and alchemical arrays. Without announcing anything, he added a brief note to the 7th-year NEWT dueling class that day. Practical drill, memory mirror. Note, those of low psychological tolerance should proceed with caution. He had only made one memory projection so far. The prototype was a minion he'd once encountered on the underground black market. Nothing too hard, just right for younger students. The first step had been the hardest. With a successful prototype, the rest would be easier. He even imagined one day bringing figures like Dumbledore, McGonagall, or Snape out of his memories, provided they had no objections. Chapter 244, First Kill Achieved. The warning spread like wildfire. Enter at your own risk if you have a weak mind. The blunt disclaimer did nothing but fuel curiosity. There were always those who wanted to test themselves. The first student to step into the new arena was Percy Weasley. After all, the head boy should lead by example. Behind him shuffled a nervous Hufflepuff and 2 curious Ravenclaws. The arena had been transformed. It now simulated a filthy, dimly lit alley, graffiti-scarred walls, the sickly stench of rotting refuse, and inferior potions hanging in the air. A feeble, illusory rain fell from a night sky, soaking the hems of their robes. At the far end of the alley, a figure gradually took shape. A middle-aged wizard in tattered black robes and a hood, eyes clouded and cruel, wand held at a crooked angle. A malicious grin split his face. He looked like a vagrant dark wizard, the kind who ambushed travelers and trafficked in the black market, one of the low-level materials in Sagres' memory projection. "You lot," the hooded figure sneered, jutting his chin at them. "What are you doing here?" The question was abrupt. The 4 of them froze. They hadn't expected the projection to speak. Professor told us to come," a Ravenclaw stammered from behind Percy. "Part of the curriculum," Percy added, frowning. A strange distortion flickered across the projection's face, as if it had heard the most amusing thing. Then it swaggered forward to inspect them. The students tensed. They didn't understand the exercise, and they had no idea what a memory projection was. Was this hooded man their target? Why hadn't he attacked immediately? Then the projection spoke one word, and everything changed. "Avada Kedavra!" A blinding green light lanced across the alley. Percy, still trying to process what was happening, didn't even have time to raise his wand. The spell struck him directly. In an instant, a white light enveloped him and dragged him from the spot. Reducto! A sharp red beam scorched toward the Hufflepuff. There was no warning, no flourish of practiced dueling etiquette, only a vicious, underhanded strike. Protego, the 7th-year Ravenclaw shouted, throwing up a shield charm. The barrier flashed into being, but the projection's spell hadn't been aimed at him. Another white light flared, and the Hufflepuff vanished too. The 2 who remained screamed. "Don't just stand there. Like Professor said, move." The only girl in the group snapped out of her shock first. She rolled aside to avoid another whistling curse and drove her wand up to strike back. Stupefy. From that moment, the duel turned ugly. The hooded projection attacked with erratic brutality, killing curses, cruciatus, blasting spells, even attempts at transfiguring the sewer sludge into venomous snakes to tangle their ankles. He hurled constant profanity and taunts meant to unnerve them. It wasn't a clean duel or a puzzle to be solved, There were no patterns to learn. It was simply an opponent who would use any dirty trick to kill them. Even knowing it was an illusion didn't help. The sound of spells tearing through the air, the impact of debris, the cold, merciless cruelty in the projection's eyes. All of it pressed down on them with real psychological weight. The remaining boy panicked and was a beat laid on his protego. A diffindo grazed his arm. The simulated pain made him cry out and almost drop his wand. "Ha ha! Two little brats who can only hide and run? Go join your companions in hell!" The projection's trash talk was limited, crude. Sargeras could tweak it later, but it made its point. Steady! Attack together! The girl barked, taking charge. She fired a string of impedimenta to slow the projection and urged her only teammate to press the advantage. After several clumsy dodges and scattered counterattacks, a well-aimed stupefy finally struck. The projection convulsed and then dissolved into the cold rain. The arena returned to stillness. The two survivors collapsed onto the wet ground, panting. Their robes were soaked, half from rain, half from sweat, and their faces were pale with lingering fear. There was no triumph in their victory, only the bewildered relief of having survived. The illusory rain stopped and their robes dried as Sargeras materialized silently at the edge of the arena. His voice was level. "How do you feel?" "Completely different," the girl managed, wiping water from her face. She still sounded breathless. He didn't play by the rules at all, much harder than a troll. "Trolls act on instinct," Sargeras said, his gaze sweeping the shaken students. "This one enjoys your fear and will use it. Remember this feeling. This is likely what you'll face in the future." Word of the exercise spread fast. The four-person team had shown everyone how terrifying these memory projections could be. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were huddled by the Gryffindor common room fireplace, talking in low, heated voices. "We have to try it," Harry said, eyes bright and determined. "Lower years are allowed in. Ginny, Luna, Astoria, they've all been through it." "But Harry," Ron said, his face going pale, "nobody who went will talk about it. They're all tight-lipped." "That's exactly why we should go," Harry insisted. Hermione closed her copy of Introduction to Magic and looked at them seriously. "If we face the real thing later, at least we won't be like the prefects." Ron fell silent. Hermione's point had shut down his argument. Across the room, Malfoy lounged on a sofa, an eyebrow raised as he watched Goyle. "If they can handle it, I can do it better," he drawled. Goyle shifted uncomfortably. "But we haven't even passed the ruins exploration exam yet," he grumbled. "Nobody wants to team up with us." "No one wants to?" Malfoy sat up with a smirk. "Then go find Potter and Weasley. Add Granger. That makes 5. "Potter? Why would they join us?" Goyle was baffled. "Why wouldn't they?" Malfoy said lightly. "I saved Potter on the Quidditch pitch last time. Doesn't that count as a favor? Venture capital." He used the Muggle term as if it were perfectly natural. Goyle frowned, trying to process the phrase. "You mean taking advantage of a favor?" "Yes," Goyle said after a pause, finding the word. Malfoy snapped his fingers. "Exactly. He owes me. What's the problem?" Hogwarts was changing, almost imperceptibly at first. In Charms, Professor Filius Flitwick was surprised to find more and more students asking how to cast the shield charm quickly and consecutively to defend against attacks from multiple directions. Even stranger, several students had begun trading unfamiliar spells from something called the Exchange Catalog and were pestering him for practical instruction. Professor Flitwick, a Ravenclaw girl, asked one afternoon, "If an opponent doesn't even speak a spell and attacks silently, how can we anticipate and defend?" In herbology, Professor Sprout noticed a sudden surge of interest in dangerous plants like venomous tentacula and devil's snare. Her students' questions had grown markedly more practical. "If you're scratched by those thorns, which antidote works fastest?" one wanted to know. "If Incendio fails, could a severing charm help us break free, or would it just make them angrier?" Even in Professor Binz's History of Magic, whispers spread among students comparing the tricks used by famous dark wizards in the lectures to techniques they'd seen in something called memory projection. The staff felt the change with mixed emotions. On one hand, the students' eagerness to learn practical defensive magic was unprecedented. On the other, the reason for that eagerness, and exposure to realistic, dangerous scenarios, sat heavy with responsibility. A few days later, Filius intercepted Sargeras in a corridor on his way to class. Sargeras, Phileas cried, startlingly animated. I must ask, how did that memory projection everyone's talking about come about? Sargeras stopped and looked down at the little professor with a calm, even tone. It's a small application based on a Pensieves principle combined with advanced magical shaping. It's designed to simulate realistic crisis scenarios so our students won't be taken down like goblins when they face danger out in the world. Real crisis, Phileas repeated, eyes lighting up. That's brilliant, far better than pretending to practice. Can it perfectly reproduce opponents from memory? Only as well as my perception allows, Sargeras said, but it's realistic enough. Phileas nearly danced on the spot. You must tell me everything. After class, come to the staff room. I'm sure I'm not the only one curious. True to his word, after classes, Sargeras pushed open the staff room door. The room was fuller than usual. Flitwick, McGonagall, Sprout, Snape, Lupin, even Professor Binns had drifted in. Conversation stilled as all eyes turned to him. Sargeras, come in, Sprout said gently. Phileas told us about that magical creation that conjures dark wizards for students to fight. It's called memory projection, Phileas corrected, then turned eagerly to Sargeras. Tell us how it works. Sargeras took the center of the room and explained the idea succinctly, leaving out unnecessary detail, but making the core clear. Extract memories to construct a magical simulacrum that mirrored the original's fighting style and patterns of thought. A creation made from memory, Merlin. Sprout breathed, covering her mouth. Can you make other kinds of characters? Not just dark wizards? Theoretically, anything with clear memories can be projected, Sargeras replied evenly. A dark wizard, a student, any humanoid with a coherent memory imprint. The room fell silent for a beat, then erupted into discussion. You can project us? Flitwick's eyes widened. So we could become training partners for the students? Exactly, Sargeras said. They can be high-difficulty opponents or set up as guides in certain scenarios. Imagine a projection of Professor Flitwick demonstrating charms or Professor McGonagall for transfiguration offense and defense. They could teach multiple students at once. The possibility thrilled them. Their knowledge and fighting styles could be preserved and multiplied. Their lessons could be deployed in many places at once. Count me in, Flitwick said at once. Let those rascals see what a true charms master can do. Mine too, Sprout said, already thinking aloud. We could design scenarios for protecting greenhouses and dealing with hazardous plants. Even the ghostly Professor Binns floated forward. What about me? Could I? Sargeras hesitated at Binns's spectral form, then offered. Combat simulations might not suit a ghost, but your projection could be added to certain dungeons as an NPC. What's an NPC? Binns asked, puzzled. A guide, Sargeras said. In puzzle dungeons, your knowledge of history could be an aid. They rarely listen to my lectures in class, Binns fretted. Would they listen in a different context? They would, Sargeras said firmly. You could even omit key details deliberately. Wouldn't that mean they learn less? Binns objected. Quite the opposite, Sargeras replied. They'll actively seek the answers themselves. The thought sat with the professors. Game experience, Sargeras suggested, can be educational experience. The lively mood quieted when McGonagall pushed her spectacles up and fixed him with a sharp look. Sargeras, she said, the room suddenly attentive, did you obtain the subject's explicit permission to extract his memories and create that projection? The question hung in the air. Snape's lips curled in a faint, cynical smile. Sargeras met McGonagall calmly. I don't know if he gave permission, he said, but I doubt he would have objected. Snape scoffed again, and an uneasy silence spread through the staff room. Sargeras let his gaze sweep over them, then nodded. If there are no further questions, I need to go select some materials. He left as calmly as he had arrived, the firelight flickering across the professors' faces, excited, concerned, intrigued, and uneasy in turns. Chapter 246, Professor Snape Debates the Crowd. Eventually, it was Professor Phileas who broke the silence in the common room. His high voice still carried excitement, but there was a trace of hesitation. Well, at least in terms of teaching results, there's no denying it. The effect is astonishing. He brightened. The students' casting speed and accuracy have improved by at least 20% this week, especially with defensive spells. Astonishing effect, but at what cost, Phileas? Professor McGonagall's voice was stern. Are we teaching students how to survive, or are we pushing them into an abyss? Sargeras's phrase, "won't talk back." Think about what that implies. Professor Sprout's expression tightened. The source of those memories, I fear they are the souls of those he defeated. And is that right? She went on. I'm afraid when those children leave the arena, their eyes won't hold just determination. They'll carry a colder, more ruthless edge. The pressure of survival strips away innocence, Phileas agreed quietly. Snape had been listening, his tone carrying that familiar sneer. Do we prefer them to go to their graves with their innocence intact? Dark wizards won't spare them out of courtesy. Sargeras's method may be crude, but it is forging combatants who can survive. As for the provenance of the memories, he allowed a short, cold laugh. I think the copyright, concerns belonging to the gentleman lying in Azkaban or in graves, can be put aside for the moment. It's trivial in comparison. Severus, McGonagall snapped. I'm stating facts, Minerva, Snape replied. Emotional indulgence is a luxury, or do I need to remind you of Trelawney's prophecy? What exactly are you saying? She demanded. Snape's black eyes swept the room. The Dark Lord is returning. Sargeras's archive of material might be the most practical defensive fortification this castle currently has. Remus Lupin, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke, his voice gentle but weighty. I understand Sargeras's approach. I truly do, but we must be careful. Will exposing students to that level of malice too early warp them? Don't we need some boundaries? Boundaries? Snape barked. Those who want to kill them won't care about boundaries. Precisely why we must uphold our line, Lupin insisted, unexpectedly firm. Have you already forgotten how Auror Alk died? Snape's tone went cold and dangerous. Or did his death fail to wake those of you choosing to pretend you were asleep? The argument threatened to lock into a stalemate when an old, steady voice spoke from the doorway. Perhaps, Dumbledore said as he entered, his gaze serene, the focus of our debate shouldn't be simply whether Sargeras's method is right or wrong. He walked to the room's center. The firelight flickered in his deep blue eyes. He has opened a door we never thought of, or that we were unwilling to open. What is behind that door is unsettling, but real. The question now is not whether we should slam it shut, but on which side of that door we, as teachers, should stand. Curious students have already rushed through, and yes, they have grown stronger because of it. He looked each professor in turn. Phileas, are you willing to let your demonstrations show not only the power of magic, but the wisdom and restraint that should govern its use? Pomona, can your exhibits, while revealing the lethal aspects of dangerous plants, also convey wonder and the imperative to protect life? Minerva, can your transfiguration displays, while demonstrating potent offense and defense, still adhere to discipline and precision? Sargeras provides the battlefield, Dumbledore continued softly, but what he fills it with is cold material born of his own understanding. If we participate, what we add will be our experience, our ideals, what we hope students can still hold on to in desperate circumstances. What we need to do is not close that door, but to light a few lamps for the students who pass through it, so that when they witness darkness, they do not forget the shape of light. Finally, he turned to McGonagall. Your ethical concerns are entirely necessary, Minerva. I will speak with Sargeras personally about the limits of his materials. But until then, I suggest we consider how to use our own projections to balance and guide the dangerous power he has unleashed. Headmaster's office. Dumbledore stood before the arched window, his aged fingertips steepled. In the distance, a flash of green light flickered again over the floating dueling arena, then vanished. He breathed a long, heavy sigh. The portraits of past headmasters and headmistresses along the walls were restless. The painted figures craned forward, fussed with collars, cleared throats, and began to chatter. Albus, dearest Derwent called, losing patience first. She leaned out of her frame with elegant impatience. Don't just sigh at the window like a lounging painting. What's happening out there? Tell us. Exactly. This child's antics grow more dangerous by the day, another former head groaned, shaking an imaginary wineglass. Dumbledore turned, surveying the portraits. He is using merciless fire in the most extreme way to forge a suit of armor for the children, Dumbledore said finally. Is that so? Splendid. Phineas Nigellus Black piped up at once. If someone had given me such armor when I was at school, I might have lived longer than my 70s. This armor can indeed protect them, Phineas, Dumbledore replied gently, but it will also change them. Throw a lump of pig iron into a furnace. Will it come out unchanged? As if we haven't changed students before. Phineas waved a dismissive hand. A rigorous education can forge strong souls. What's wrong with that? Must you wrap students in cotton wool? Iosha Sockendenberg, uncharacteristically outspoken, interjected. Phineas, you can't support all of this just because that boy cleared your great-grandson's name. Why not? Phineas cut in. Isn't repaying a kindness what you lot keep preaching? You're being illogical, Iosha snapped. When has Hogwarts ever openly brought dirty dark arts into our halls? Illogical? Phineas sneered. Who here doesn't know a dark art spell or two? This is adaptation. Smart people do it. He added viciously, if you can't, it's because you're too foolish, and foolishness is a moral failing. A fool can never be truly kind. It's an incurable evil. Iosha flared at those words. She sprang from her frame and shoved into Phineas's portrait. The two of them began bickering loudly, the painted quarrel dragging down the corridor as they fought shamelessly within their canvases. Chapter 247. People need to draw courage from others. Ambrose Swat and Armando Dippet hurried over to the portrait where two figures were tangling and pulled them apart. Phineas Black, still fussing over his crooked tie, muttered insults like savage and uncouth as he straightened himself. In another frame, Iosha Sackendenberg stood with her back to them all, shoulders heaving, clearly furious. Ambrose cleared his throat and took the floor. Phineas, mind your language, he said lightly. Then he shifted tone. But putting aside personal attacks, we need to face reality. He turned to Dumbledore with a heavy look. Albus, you know better than any of us what the world outside is like. If you say the Dark Lord will return, this isn't an academic debate anymore. Dumbledore listened. Ambrose went on. At a time like this, it isn't enough for students to learn how to turn a teacup into a tortoise or perfectly summon an aguamenti. Greengrass's methods are certainly radical and unsettling, but what he teaches is how to recognize and resist the dark arts, skills that will let them survive beyond the castle. Principal Armando Dippet, stroking his gray beard, nodded slowly. Ambrose is right. You all know what happened during my tenure. Pure theoretical knowledge is pale comfort when the dark comes knocking. I often wonder, if we had prepared the children more thoroughly back then, could some tragedies have been prevented? But aren't such methods too extreme? Iosha demanded. We cannot reject a necessary method simply because it's radical, Iosha, Ambrose replied. Polishing can be painful, but the result may be the difference between life and death. Albus, Darius Derwent added gently, I understand you and Iosha's concerns. The dark arts can corrupt the mind. Premature exposure can change a child, but Sargeras isn't teaching students to use the dark arts. He's pulling back the veil, showing operational principles and how to break them. Knowledge itself isn't good or evil. It depends on how it's guided. Examining darkness in the light can strip it of its power more effectively than forbidding and fearing it. It's a preventative treatment, though a feverish one. Even Everard, who rarely joined arguments, inclined his head. In extraordinary times, extraordinary measures are needed. Hogwarts' duty is to protect its students. If the darkness has reached our gates, we must arm them within the school, not only the castle's walls, but the defenses in each student. His intention was to strengthen those defenses. Hearing so many colleagues support the idea, Phineas Black brightened and shot Iosha a triumphant look. See? Wisdom! Iosha turned, still stern, but with so many voices in agreement, she let the matter drop. Dumbledore nodded. Thank you for your counsel. It has helped. He sighed. I suppose with age I have indeed become indecisive. Indecisive? Dearest said, shaking her head. No, Albus, thoughtful. Impulsiveness is a fault of youth. Phineas sniggered. She's saying you're old, but no one paid him much mind. Armando Dippet shrugged. This is normal. Sitting in such a position makes one overly cautious. That's true, Phineas added, but it won't be like this once you're hanging on the wall like us. The portrait's debate dwindled to a low hum. Dumbledore stared out at the darkening grounds, fingers tapping the windowsill. He had convinced the faculty, but he needed another audience. Perhaps Phineas was right. Maybe only the perspective of being on a portrait would strip away his caution. He let the thought pass like a shadow. Afterward, Sargeras began introducing other memory projections into the dueling arena one by one. They were no longer just lone dark wizards. He conjured insidious black market merchants, witches skilled in mental manipulation, werewolves who killed without hesitation, and wanted criminals who had escaped justice. Many old faces from his memories were rebuilt and trapped within the arena's monoliths. It was like conducting an experiment. Students went in, struggled, failed, and came out pale. They went back in, learned from mistakes, and tried again. Sargeras wanted them to rehearse potential cruelty in a controlled, repeatable environment until the most primitive fear dulled and correct responses became muscle memory. He also added a more malicious twist to the monoliths. When a team had fewer than 5 members, activating a monolith could randomly recruit 1 to 4 temporary teammates made of memory projections. These mirror wizards had independent personalities and seemed reasonably competent. They assisted with puzzles and crises. But behind the help lay a profound betrayal. When a team neared its goal, the contract's bonds would loosen. If only one projection had been recruited, it was highly likely to turn on the team at a critical moment, leveling its wand at the very companions it had sworn to protect. If 2 or more were recruited, there would always be exactly one who would inevitably reveal fangs. Trust became the arena's most luxurious trial. Students had to learn to rely on teammates while keeping a reserve of vigilance for these stranger companions. The betrayal trial was like ice and fire together, pushing students to extremes of panic and exhilaration. At first, the betrayals worked brilliantly. Teams relaxed on the eve of victory and were struck down by a spell from a supposed ally, or they were stunned by the sudden turn and lost precious seconds. But the students adapted. They stopped giving their backs to monolith recruits. While moving, someone would habitually shift their stance to keep the temporary companion in peripheral vision. Conversations grew concise and guarded. Full tactical disclosure stopped. A silent agreement formed among true teammates. If a recruited mirror raised its wand at the last moment, it would be met with 2 stupefy spells from different angles and a precise Expelliarmus before it could finish an unforgivable. Players learned to keep a portion of their magic in reserve for instant control or defense. They developed secret signals and glances to focus their fire on the likely betrayer at crucial moments. Trust became rarer and more valuable, but also stronger when earned. The high-pressure environment also produced another response: hypervigilance. Some students, repeatedly abandoned by their own people, began to see betrayal everywhere. During one temple exploration, Hermione, tense and over-interpreting the faint tightening of a mirror teammate's grip on its wand, launched a preemptive spell. Stupefy. The spell struck the innocent mirror. It dissolved instantly. The sudden friendly fire cost the team a member and ruined their coordinated rhythm. At that moment, a host of dry mummies crawled from their sarcophagi, and the true betrayer revealed itself early. Within seconds, white lights flashed, 3 flashes, and the trio was ejected from the arena by a team wipe. Hermione's face was etched with regret and shame. Harry and Ron, hardened by failures of their own, were more resigned than surprised. Chapter 248, a brand new version you've never played before. Under Dumbledore's coordination and advice, the Hogwarts professors finally reached an agreement. Rather than questioning Sargeras's cold, efficient methods, they would take part themselves, guiding, balancing, and contributing their own philosophies. For the next few weeks, an empty classroom beside the staff common room was repurposed. There, Sargeras set up a short course, Introduction to Memory Mirror Creation. The process proved more complex than many of them had imagined. It required advanced memory extraction and solidification techniques, precise magical shaping, and the programming of combat logic. The system was built on formal logic and exact control, hard for wizards used to intuition and freeform spellcasting to grasp. Among them, Professor Flitwick learned the fastest, his enthusiasm for this new application of magic unmistakable. "It's brilliant. Sargeras, this is basically digitizing magic," Flitwick exclaimed, perched on a stack of thick books, his wand flicking continuously. "If we add a conditional branch here, the mirror could choose between shattering charm or cutting charm, depending on the opponent's shield charm strength." Sargeras found himself surprised. He had not expected such advanced, analytical thinking from Flitwick. Older wizards often clung to established habits, but Flitwick's quickness and innovative mindset were refreshing. Professor McGonagall took a different approach. Her process was painstaking and exacting. She repeatedly adjusted a transfiguration detail in her memory, seeking the perfect texture for every plate of armor. "Details decide success, Sargeras," she said without looking up. "If my mirror is going to teach students, it must be impeccable, both as an example and as an opponent." "You're absolutely right," Sargeras replied, lingering long before moving on to Professor Sprout. "How do you translate herbology into offensive and defensive tactics?" Professor Sprout looked puzzled for a moment. "You said only characters from memory can be constructed. What about plants? Do I have to use real magical plants? I can't get some varieties quickly." "For now, you can substitute with the real plants you have," Sargeras said after a moment's thought. "I'll work on a way to construct magical creatures in the future." Sprout brightened. Then I could simulate throwing devil's snare seeds at dark wizards, or have the mirror carry a few domesticated biting cabbages, obviously weakened versions." Around her, parchments filled with tactical diagrams lay scattered. Snape's participation brought a muted, almost sinister excitement. Behind his composed face, Sargeras detected the ghost of a smile, evidence that he had ideas about building a far more lethal projection. Lupin took the longest to finish. He had recently taken a leave of absence. His face still looked pale, and his hair a little whiter. "I must make it complete," he murmured to Sargeras. "You understand, there are always those few days each month. I can't always have Snape cover for me." He wanted a projection with a full knowledge system, capable of teaching on its own, so he could manage during those difficult days. Sargeras nodded, considering whether to help. Lupin was honest and decent. He had few enemies in Sargeras's estimation. The most unexpected participant was Albus Dumbledore. The headmaster watched the process with amusement at first and insisted Sargeras shape it according to the most authentic image you have of me. "It will be interesting." Sargeras refused. "Do it yourself. I don't know which spells you favor or in what circumstances you'd choose them." Dumbledore paused, then began, slowly and deliberately, to craft his own mirror. Hagrid, awkward and unsure, hesitated at the doorway. I can't do such delicate work, Sargeras. You know I was expelled in my 3rd year. It's hard for me to help the little witches and wizards in an instance." "Don't underestimate yourself," Sargeras told him calmly. "You may not be able to teach them charms, but there are other things you can offer." Hagrid blinked. "Other things?" "You'll see," Sargeras said, and then, by his own operations, extracted and solidified Hagrid's memories of animal taming. In the dual monument system, a tall figure with that same genial, shaggy smile soon took its place. Sargeras had no objection to the professor's involvement, but he insisted on one core rule. All mirrors, yours included, will be integrated into the system. They can be challenged by students or be recruited as temporary teammates. They may give limited help in an instance, consistent with their identity and expertise, but they must also follow the rules. There is a probability they will switch allegiance at the last moment and betray the students. That probability rises significantly if the team's specialized scores in the relevant subjects are too low. The professors exchanged looks. Some expressions were unreadable, others mildly amused, but they all agreed. They understood the lesson beneath Sargeras's hard line. Absolute safety breeds complacency, a controlled risk. The possibility of betrayal is a truer rehearsal for real danger. Soon the students discovered the dual monument on the floating arena had received a major update. Alongside the familiar dark wizards, several well-known figures now shimmered into being on the monument's surface. Merlin's beard. One of them is Professor McGonagall, a Ravenclaw cried, voice shaking with excitement. She just turned a giant rock into a silverback cheetah, and it took down that traitor with 1 pounce. How cool is that? She's great, but not as good as Professor Flitwick, a Hufflepuff squealed, mimicking the Charms Master's hand movements. His silent spells are so fast, just a blur. Before we could even see, he'd used a perfect sequence of Stupefy and Expelliarmus to suppress 2 dark wizards. It was like watching a silent symphony. Having a professor's mirror as a teammate felt dreamlike. An easy mode had been unlocked. Their strength, Deep knowledge and calm judgment solved most of the instance's challenges, and for the students, the sense of security rose dramatically. Chapter 249, A Place in History. That afternoon, 4 students gestured excitedly in front of the stone tablet, shouting, "Ha ha! This is brilliant! It's Headmaster Dumbledore!" 4 overjoyed Gryffindors, accompanied by the mirror image of the Dumbledore they'd just recruited, entered the temple dungeon. The double wore the star and moon robes, bore a flowing silver beard, and had kind, wise eyes. He pointed out terrain and potential hidden magical mechanisms with a gentle, soothing manner, dispelled their fatigue with small revitalization spells, and even produced a little trick with colorful candies that made everyone laugh. "There's absolutely no problem this time," the lead student crowed, stuffing his wand into his pocket. "With Headmaster Dumbledore escorting us, we could clear this with our eyes closed. We might even break the record." Dumbledore smiled behind his half-moon spectacles. "Children, relying too much on old men is not a good habit. Still, let's see what interesting things we encounter today." He conjured a lemon sherbet. "Care for a candy? It helps keep one's spirits up." The dungeon progressed more smoothly than they'd imagined. Some students were already planning which items they'd pick from the exchange catalog. Dangerous dark arts traps quietly disintegrated under the old man's casual little spells, and fierce magical creatures were deftly diverted or soothed by him. "Professor, Headmaster, how did you spot that trap?" Parvati asked, admiring. Dumbledore blinked. "Experience and observation, my dear, and a little understanding of the nature of magic. Often, the most obvious temptation hides the deepest danger." "But you're the greatest white wizard of the century," Lee Jordan said eagerly. "All dangers must look like child's play to you, right?" "Oh, thank you for your trust." Dumbledore smiled. "But you might be overestimating me." "How could that be? I'm sure you're the most powerful of all the mirror images." They moved through the corridors as if on a picnic, arriving at the magnificent stone door of the final hall without hindrance. Victory seemed certain, and Lavender nearly bounced with excitement. "We did it! It was that easy!" One of them reached out to push the door. "Let's go get our reward. This pace has to be a record." Ecstasy filled every Gryffindor's chest. Just as the confident leader was about to open the final door, the Dumbledore mirror image beside him gave a soft, regretful sigh. His voice was still gentle, but a chill threaded through it. "My dear children," he said, tilting his head and letting his gaze sweep over their frozen, grinning faces, "do you know, sometimes the deadliest threat does not come from a frontal foe, but from unreserved trust." The next moment, the corridor seemed to be thrown into a furnace. Without warning, flames, so fierce they warped the air, burst from nowhere, roaring like beasts and instantly filling the passage. The 4 students felt trapped, as if insects preserved in amber, unable to move a finger as the blaze closed in. Dumbledore kept his compassionate expression and shook his head almost sadly. "Remember this lesson," he murmured. "I hope this burning will help you live a little longer the next time you face real danger." They tried to draw their wands but found themselves paralyzed, helpless. "Professor? Why?" "Why?" the double said. "Because a meticulously designed betrayal can teach you to be cautious far better than a fire-breathing dragon. This is what Professor Greengrass wants to teach you. The name of this lesson is Absolute Security is a Deadly Illusion." Then, with a casual flick of his wand, white flashes snapped through the air. The 4 Gryffindors were hurled out as if by an invisible giant hand, flung instantly from the dungeon. They staggered onto the corridor outside, unsteady and hollow-eyed, as if life itself had been questioned. "That fast? Must have been a speed run, right? Is Headmaster Dumbledore ridiculously strong?" a curious onlooker asked. People crowded around. The leader slowly lifted his head, his face a collapsed, incredulous mess as if his whole worldview had been smashed. "Ridiculously strong, beyond imagination," he breathed then, as if on the verge of tears, added, "but he betrayed us." There was a stunned silence. Then the campus erupted. The headmaster's betrayal, newsworthy of being written into Hogwarts history, rippled through every corner with blinding speed. The shock and absurdity eclipsed the combined surprise attacks of all previous Dark Wizard and Wandering Mirror images. The betrayal, delivered with a nearly cruel sense of humor, drove Sargeras's grim lesson, one he'd always tried to instill deep into every student's mind. In the arena, never fully trust anyone, no matter how powerful, reliable, or righteous they seem. From that day on, the dungeon's appeal shot up. Every recruitment became a thrilling gamble. Every expedition alongside a professor mirror image carried a shadow of suspicion. The professors themselves listened with mixed feelings as tales of their other selves in the arena spread. Sometimes their doubles would rescue everyone from peril, earning cheers of, "Our boss is awesome." Other times, their doubles would plunge teams into danger and deliver an educational backstab, followed by cries of, "I'm not okay." During potions that week, Snape glided silently between students like a hovering bat, scrutinizing their cauldrons. He halted behind a Gryffindor and leaned in with an oppressive presence. "Longbottom," he drawled, "if the gilly water you call a brain retains an ounce of processing ability, you'll know it's time to stir, not to stare blankly like a troll." Neville flinched and nearly toppled his cauldron. Ron leaned toward Harry. "Do you think he'll suddenly add something extra to our potion? Like in the arena?" The whispered comment was soft, but Snape's attention snapped to them. He fixed Ron with a cold smile. "Oh, it seems Mr. Weasley has finally redirected his limited mental faculties from what to eat today to pointless fantasies." Ron's face went beet red as Snape continued to drip venom. "It appears Professor Greengrass's situational teaching has been effective, successfully planting fear into your already meager brains." He stooped until their noses were almost touching. "Let me explain the difference, boy. In the arena, he teaches you to beware everyone. Here," his voice dropped to an almost inaudible hiss, "you only need to beware of me, and if I truly wish to add something to your cauldron." He straightened, a cool false smile settling on his face. "You wouldn't have any chance to notice. You'd be lying in the hospital, contemplating life." He turned away with a flourish. "And Gryffindor, 10 points from the house for foolish delusions and wasting the class's time. Now stir." Chapter 250, Lupin's Great Uncle. At breakfast, Dumbledore watched the whispering students with half-moon spectacles perched on his nose and kept glancing over at Sargeras, who sat at the end of the staff table. In a mild voice, he said, "My dear Sargeras, I must admit you've injected an unprecedented vitality into Hogwarts." Sargeras, slowly cutting a piece of steak, lifted his eyes. "You tried the teaching instance yourself?" he asked calmly. Dumbledore nodded. "Last night, in the middle of the night, I recruited 4 temporary teammates." "And how did it go?" Sargeras asked without looking up. "An eye-opener," Dumbledore said with a smile. "If not for you, I doubt I'd ever live to see Minerva betray me." He popped a candy into his mouth with a conspiratorial air. "Even now when I eat, I can't help glancing to see if it will suddenly become a lesson." "That only shows the teaching works, Headmaster," Sargeras replied indifferently. "Constant vigilance is the first rule of survival, whether it's candy or people." Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. "I imagine you'd and Alastor Moody would get along splendidly." "Mad-Eye Moody?" Sargeras repeated, then shook his head. "I appreciate his practical spirit, but his methods lack systematic structure and lean too heavily on personal instinct." Minerva McGonagall, finally unable to stay out of the conversation, spoke up with a hint of strain in her voice. "Albus, for the record, what you faced was only a magical construct. Its behavior followed an extreme interpretation of practical teaching. I would never treat a colleague that way myself." "Oh, I know that, Minerva," Dumbledore said innocently. "I must say, your mirror transfiguration was exquisite. You turned the floor into a constantly shifting viscous treacle to restrain me. Very creative." Professor Filius Flitwick, arriving in a burst of excitement, leaned in. "What were its tactics? Preemptive control or reactive counterattack? I added several stylistic variations to my mirror image, just waiting for a student to trigger them." "Then you might be disappointed, Filius," Dumbledore replied with a smile. "At least for now, students capable of threatening a professor's projection don't seem to exist." "They won't be far off," Filius said with certainty. "The students are improving so quickly. At this rate, it won't be long before a team defeats a rebellious professor." Professor Sprout straightened. "We shouldn't be taking this as a joke. The children come into the greenhouse like it's a minefield. Even the gentlest ditny startles them. Yesterday, a student tried incendio on a harmless Mimblelus Mimbletonia because its color looked a bit like the biting cabbage my projection used. Sargeras finished his steak, set down his cutlery, wiped his mouth, and regarded them all calmly. These are growing pains of learning, Professor Sprout. It's better that they are cautious now in a greenhouse than dead later for having misjudged something in the wild. The conversation dwindled, and the professors rose to leave, each lost in their own thoughts. Sargeras stood and walked out with them. By the marble staircase in the entrance hall, Remus Lupin had been waiting. Lupin's eyes were tired and earnest. His voice came out a little hoarse. "Professor Greengrass, may I have a word?" Sargeras stopped and looked at him, gray eyes steady. "Yes, Professor Lupin? It's about next Friday." Lupin looked anxious. "I won't be able to teach that day. I usually ask Professor Snape to cover for me, but that's not ideal. I was wondering, could your teaching projections take my students to the arena that day and run a simple teaching instance so their learning isn't interrupted?" Sargeras watched him in silence, the way he watched the rest of the hall, calm, appraising, as if he could see beneath Lupin's composed surface to the pain that accumulated from his monthly change. After a moment he spoke, his voice unruffled. "Perhaps we could try to solve that problem more fundamentally." Lupin froze, his pupils constricted. "Well, what do you mean?" "I can cast a spell that reshapes your form and locks it permanently in human shape," Sargeras said, as if stating a fact. "Wolfsbane can only keep you sane during transformation. It cannot stop the change itself or the agony of the physical process." Color drained from Lupin's face. He took a half step back and leaned against the cold stone, breathing fast. How is that possible?" He searched Sargeras' face, then asked in a small, hopeful voice, "What's the cost? There must be a cost." "Of course," Sargeras said without hesitation. "Once the magic takes hold, you will no longer be able to perform any human transfiguration, and your appearance will be fixed exactly as it is at the moment the spell completes, unchangeable for the rest of your life." "This too is a price?" Lupin whispered. The news was almost too much to take. That decades of dread and resignation might be overturned. Hope and disbelief warred in his eyes. "I've never heard of such magic. It's unheard of." "Cursed transfiguration," Sargeras explained evenly. "Or permanent transfiguration, if you prefer. Think of it as a powerful, stable mold cast over your form. It will overlay and fix your body at a given state. You will no longer endure the magical shock and bone reconfiguration that make the transformation so agonizing, and your outward form will remain permanently human." He spread his hand, a galleon in his palm rippling through several shapes as a casual demonstration. "That said, clear rationality will still require wolfsbane. This magic affects only the physical form. It does not quiet the bestial mind." Lupin stared at him, stunned. He had fought the monster inside him his whole life, punctuated recently by costly potions that granted him a measure of dignity. He had never imagined anyone would suggest a direct, almost brutal cure to cage the beast within his flesh. He swallowed and asked, voice trembling, "Why would you help me?" Sargeras's gaze swept casually over the few scattered students still in the entrance hall. "For the continuity of teaching. A professor who is absent every minds the curriculum. Solving your problem will fundamentally improve the quality of instruction. Besides," he added, tone softening a fraction, "you are a competent teacher. I've read the students' evaluations. Your talents shouldn't be limited by a monthly weakness." He looked out the window, then back at Lupin. "You don't need to answer now. Think it over and come find me before the next full moon. Be warned, the procedure may be painful." With that, Sargeras nodded and walked away. Lupin leaned against the cold stone, his heart roiling like a storm-tossed sea. Decades of despair, the sudden arrival of hope, fear of unknown magic, and an aching desire for a normal life warred inside him. At last, he drew a deep breath, a small flicker of resolve lighting his eyes. "I need to speak with Professor Dumbledore." "You may," Sargeras said. He paused, then looked back at Lupin. "You should bring Severus as well. This procedure will require his potions, for assistance and as insurance." That night, in the headmaster's office, the orange lamp glow was warm, but the atmosphere heavy. Dumbledore sat behind his desk, fingertips steepled, listening as Sargeras explained the plan in an even, emotionless voice. Severus Snape stood in the shadows like a black statue, only his pursed lips betraying the tension within him. Therefore, strictly speaking, this is not a cure in the traditional sense, Sargeras concluded, and a complex model of a human form, woven from golden threads of light, hovered before him. The werewolf curse is rooted in blood and is nearly irreversible. My method bypasses the idea of healing and performs a morphological overwrite. It uses a permanent transfiguration to fundamentally reshape his physical form, forcibly locking him into a stable human state. He pointed out several key nodes in the lit diagram. I can also construct an eternal morphological mold, here with magic. Not only will the full moon no longer trigger a transformation, the magic channeled through that mold may even grant passive enhancements, sharper senses, or greater strength. But the core is this: the werewolf form will be permanently prevented from manifesting. What's the cost? Dumbledore asked softly. His blue eyes flickered with wary light. He did not believe such magic would come without a price. 3 things, Sargeras replied. First, Professor Lupin will permanently lose the ability to perform any human transfiguration. Second, his appearance will be fixed at the moment the spell completes. Time will no longer touch him. Third, the procedure may be painful and will require his absolute, unwavering will. His tone darkened. Furthermore, this magic belongs to a forbidden field I have researched independently. Some will regard it as blasphemy against the natural order. To avoid unnecessary trouble, it should remain secret. The office fell silent, broken only by a soft chirp from Fawkes. Snape, eyes narrowed, spoke abruptly. So your grand pronouncement in one sentence: you plan to use magic to turn him into a human? His voice carried unmistakable sarcasm. You could put it that way. Sargeras nodded. It sounds utterly preposterous. Snape raised an eyebrow. And this theory reads like something a dark wizard would devise, evil magic to create permanent slaves. He glanced sideways at Lupin in the shadows, as if issuing a thinly veiled warning. Lupin, lost in his own thoughts, did not meet the look. Your understanding is flawed, Professor Snape, Sargeras said calmly. First, this is not magic conceived by any dark wizard in history. Second, magic intended to enslave permanently is usually simpler and far less complex. Snape's jaw tightened. My question is, what guarantees that it will be as effective as you claim? What assures the absolute safety of the procedure and of what comes after? After a pause, his voice dropped lower, almost vicious. Or to be blunt, are you 100% certain this dangerous trick won't produce an unprecedented, more terrifying monster? On the surface, he feigned concern. Underneath, he seemed to relish the possibility of disaster. He even allowed himself the thought that if it worked, perhaps it could one day be used on Sirius Black. You can be assured on that point, Professor Snape. Sargeras's answer was cold, as if he had already seen through the darker impulses behind Snape's questions. The stability of magic lies in the absolute rigor of its internal structure, not in whether it conforms to personal aesthetics or moral expectation. He shifted the subject. Also, I will need you to brew a soul-stabilizing potion, not to dull pain, but to protect his soul from collapsing during the transfiguration. That belongs to your expertise. Snape's black eyes were bottomless and cold as he locked onto Sargeras, then swept over Lupin. Complex, unreadable emotions churned in them, aversion, and an almost cruel curiosity. After a long moment, he gave a reluctant, clipped, "Fine." Dumbledore's gaze lingered on Lupin. "Remus," he asked gently, "what is your wish? This requires your full conscious consent and absolute trust in Sargeras." Lupin's hands trembled. He closed his eyes, images flashing before him, howling in the moonlight, the dreadful looks of those who had seen him change. Then he opened his eyes, and the hesitation there had gone. Something in him had hardened into determination. "Most of my life I've spent hiding and fearing," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "Now that a true path lies before me, one that would let me stand in sunlight without hurting anyone, I'm willing to try, no matter how dangerous. I trust you, Professor Dumbledore. And I trust you, Professor Greengrass." He turned his head toward the shadow. "And you, Severus, thank you for your help." Snape snorted and turned his face away. The procedure took place in a fortified chamber beneath the History of Magic classroom, chosen by Dumbledore for absolute safety and isolation. The room had no elaborate runes or etched alchemical circles. Everything was unadorned, almost unnaturally simple. Lupin lay on a makeshift platform of pushed-together desks. First, he accepted a vial of viscous, mother-of-pearl potion from Snape, then another vial, a clarity potion from Sagres, and drank them in a single gulp. The potions took hold quickly. His muscles relaxed, while his mind became painfully acute, every sensation sharpened. As the full moon rose into the night sky, the familiar agonies began. Lupin let out a raw, involuntary growl. His body trembled and his bones creaked. The change had begun. Sagres raised his wand. He intoned the spell, and immense magic poured from the tip in countless golden filaments that wrapped around Lupin, embedding themselves deep into flesh and blood. But instead of a long, terrible spectacle, the transformation unfolded astonishingly quickly. Just as Lupin braced for a prolonged ordeal, the tearing pain ebbed like a retreating tide. A strange, liquefying sensation flowed through him, as if his body melted and was gently poured into a custom-made, stable container. He did not suffer the cataclysmic agony he had always feared. Sagres' control was meticulous. He smoothed away the old scars on Lupin's cheeks, the marks of his suffering, and quietly restored prematurely gray hair to a warm brown. When the moonlight, refracted through the chamber's crystals, reached its peak, the golden threads contracted and vanished into Lupin's body. He felt the wild force within him, eager to break loose, gradually settle. It was not merely suppressed, it had been reshaped. The beast within had been restrained and tamed by that eternal mold, becoming a gentle yet powerful current that flowed steadily through his limbs. Moonlight no longer brought pain and shame, but a cool, soothing peace. He was no longer a werewolf. He was also not quite the same Remus Lupin as before. The enormity of it left him speechless. He lifted his hands and stared at them, familiar and yet strange. Hot tears fell, one after another, onto the cold tabletop beneath him. Relief at the lifting of a burden, the rapture of being reborn, the stunned awe of facing a brand new future. "Happy birthday," Sagres said, putting his wand away in a flat tone. "Thank you," Lupin whispered. Chapter 252, Lupin, I'm stronger and more handsome. "When did you learn to brew potions of this caliber?" Snape asked, staring at the nearly empty glass vial in his hand. He didn't look up as he spoke to Sagres. "As far as I know, you aren't without talent in potion making, but you've never been one for wasting time over cauldrons and stirring rods." "Bought it," Sagres answered casually. In truth, Nightingale had given him the potion, but he hadn't used it until now. Snape's head snapped up, his dark eyes fixed on Sagres, unwilling to miss so much as a twitch of expression. "Bought it?" he repeated. "From where?" Sagres met his gaze with calm, untroubled gray eyes and said nothing, his silence a clear refusal. Snape let out a short, cold snort and said no more. He set the empty vial down hard on a nearby table and stalked away, his black robes trailing like a shadow. His attitude toward Sagres had grown complex, an ugly mix of revulsion and resentful respect, threaded with an unease he was loath to admit. Sagres had, by methods Snape could not understand, accomplished what countless brilliant wizards had striven for across centuries and failed. He had brute force rewritten rules. It was no longer merely deep magic. It felt like sacrilege. Snape, who had made innovations of his own, understood what that implied all too well. Dumbledore watched Lupin with something like wonder. Lupin, reborn, shone with a light Dumbledore had never seen in him before. He watched Sagres put his wand away as if he'd just finished a classroom demonstration, and his expression was a tangle of worry and awe. As a former Transfiguration master, Dumbledore understood better than most the potential and the danger of an ability that verged on creation. Both he and Snape silently refrained from asking questions, fortunate, perhaps, because the only answers Sagres could have given would have been unhelpful. Long hours of work, sweat, and the grudging assistance of a few dark wizards. For Lupin, the result was nothing less than a rebirth. The new body freed him from 30 years of a curse and came with tangible, sometimes awkward gifts. His night vision was extraordinary. He could see in near-total darkness. His strength and endurance far outstripped those of ordinary wizards, so unexpectedly abundant that it surprised him. His sense of danger sharpened. It would peak on full moon nights, but even on ordinary days, his reaction speed had increased by over 20%. His wand work was faster, his movements more agile. The sudden influx of power brought small inconveniences. He sometimes felt too light on his feet. His strength made him clumsy with delicate objects, and he would need time to relearn how to live in this body that was at once familiar and foreign. News of Lupin's change shook only Sargeras's inner circle. Lyle Lupin, Remus's father, wept when he learned the curse had been broken. He could barely steady his hand as he wrote a long, stammering letter of thanks to Sargeras, each line choked with the relief and joy of a father freed from a lifelong burden. Down in Snape's private storeroom in the dungeons, an unusual silence settled. He wasn't merely organizing ingredients. He found himself tapping his fingertips on the table, staring at a blank notebook. The pages contained his observations and deductions from that night, but they were mostly ink blots and heavily crossed-out hypotheses. Everything he knew felt pale and powerless next to Sargeras's inexplicable magic. It angered him, and yet fired his curiosity all the more. He wanted to know how it had been done. Dumbledore returned to the headmaster's office and did not immediately reach for his sweets. He stood beside Fawkes on his perch and stared through the thick castle stone toward the long future. If even Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration could be broken, what did that mean for the barrier between life and death? If the resurrection stone could not be found, might there be another way? The questions churned in his mind. For most of the students, none of that registered. Their priorities were the same as always: earn as many house points as possible in the remaining weeks and trade them for the things they wanted. In front of the dueling monument on the floating arena, the atmosphere was electric as teams raced to collect points. In a corridor, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were stopped by two unexpected faces: Draco Malfoy and the taciturn Gregory Goyle. Malfoy stood with his arms crossed, pale chin tilted, arrogance tempered by an odd, calculating look. "Potter," he drawled, "and Weasley, Granger." "As if I hadn't just noticed," he continued. "Perfect. Saves me the trouble of looking for you." "What strange things do you want now, Malfoy?" Ron asked warily. "Looking for another duel with Harry?" "Neither," Malfoy said lazily. "I'm offering you an opportunity." "You're offering us an opportunity?" Hermione asked, puzzled. "We need teammates," Malfoy said bluntly. "Goyle and I need points to exchange for items, and you three are the best choices." Hermione's suspicion flared. "Why us? You could find 6 other Slytherins." "Because they aren't bright." Malfoy's impatience showed for a moment before he smoothed it into his usual sneer. "They're more trouble than they're worth. We need some brains. And Potter," he leveled his gaze, "remember Quidditch. If I hadn't interfered then, you might still be groaning in the hospital wing. Consider this a chance to repay the favor." He dredged up the old incident and framed his earlier intervention as a debt to be repaid. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged glances. They did not wholly trust Malfoy. After all, the school year had altered rather than erased his malice, but his pure animus seemed diminished. The offer felt awkward, but not entirely unacceptable. Harry, who did feel in some small way indebted, hesitated only for a moment. "All right," they agreed after a quick discussion. "But clearly, if you two perform poorly and constantly hold us back, we can quit at any time." "Likewise, Potter," Malfoy said, forcing a smile. "Then it's settled. After lunch at the arena. Don't be late." He turned, robes rustling, and left with Goyle. Ron watched them go and muttered, "I still think this is a bad idea." Harry looked at him. "But weren't you the one who persuaded me to agree?" "Yes," Ron admitted. "But that was because he did help on the Quidditch pitch. He did intervene. I still say we might not have been in trouble even without him, but it's a fact he helped." "You have a point," Harry said with a small, helpless laugh. "Still, my personal misgivings stand." Ron pointed at Malfoy's retreating figure. "I don't like him, especially when I remember the things he called Hermione. He never apologized." Hermione's reply was unexpectedly calm, with a touch of indifference. "Honestly, I don't care about that anymore. It can't hurt me now." She remembered what Professor Greengrass had told her privately and found it reasonable. Words have a kind of power only if the listener accepts them. If you don't care, malicious words lose their sting. Mudblood? Know-it-all? Those labels no longer reached her. She simply didn't let them. Chapter 253, Domineering Granger. After lunch, the 5 of them gathered in front of the floating arena, each with their own thoughts. The air was a little strained. The divide between Gryffindor and Slytherin felt like a physical wall. 2 years of training had matured them, though, and they could at least set aside house rivalries long enough to pursue a practical goal. "How do we coordinate? Who's in charge?" Harry asked. "Obviously, Granger will handle the decrypting. She knows the most about those ancient runes," Malfoy said unexpectedly, acknowledging Hermione's strengths. "Potter and I will be the main combatants," he continued. "Goyle will hold the front and guard the rear. Don't worry, his shield charm and obstacle curses are solid. Weasley will flank and support, plug gaps as needed. Temporary command is situational. Whoever spots a problem calls it out, and the rest execute." The plan was sensible, taking everyone's abilities into account. Hermione surprised them by speaking up. "I'll be the main attacker and take care of defense, too." Malfoy blinked, surprised. "Shouldn't we each play to our strengths, Granger?" "That's true," she said, "but training is supposed to make us well-rounded. Don't pigeonhole people by what they used to be." Malfoy shrugged, apparently ready to argue, then spread his hands. "Fine. I hope you know what you're doing." They reached an agreement and fell into position. The surroundings shifted. Ancient stone walls rose, and hot, dry air rushed past them. A magnificent, decrepit Egyptian temple loomed ahead. They cast Alahomora together. The heavy door creaked open to reveal a dust-choked hall. Slivers of light fell through cracks high above, and two enormous Anubis statues stood on either side, eyes closed like sleeping sentinels. When the five stepped into the center, the statues' eyes flared red and their stone heads slowly inclined, locking on to the intruders. With a grinding roar, enormous stone fists slammed down. They had never seen these exact guardians before, but the pattern wasn't new. Sargeras's contraptions were often reskinned, different location and form, same core mechanisms. The five split and dodged with practiced precision. "Scatter!" Harry shouted and blasted a reducto at the knee joint of one statue. Hermione sent a precise freezing ray at the other, slowing its movements noticeably. She then planted her wand at the statue's feet. "Quicksand trap," she called. The solid stone slabs liquefied into a swirling quicksand vortex, and the statue's heavy lower body sank, its forward momentum arrested. Her new spell from the exchange catalog was still rough around the edges, but it did the job. She followed immediately with a white flash from her wand. Reducto. The spell struck a gem set in the statue's chest. It detonated with a deafening explosion. The statue's eyes went dark, and it collapsed into rubble. On the other side, Ron and Goyle worked together against the second statue Malfoy had slowed. Ron fired off a stream of impedimenta charms, creating invisible barriers that hampered the stone guardian's movement, while Goyle projected a stalwart shield charm and led it around the hall in circles. Harry and Malfoy cast repeated blasts, but the statue's speed kept them from hitting its chest gem. Hermione stepped in again, aiming at the floor. Collapse and sink. The ground gave way into a deep pit. The statue, lunging after Goyle, stumbled into the hole and fell. Two coordinated spell strikes demolished its magic core. Stage 1 cleared. They passed through the dust-choked hall into a narrow, dark corridor, pocked with dozens of holes. "Watch for traps," Ron warned, wand raised, expecting shafts of arrows. Instead, innumerable dark, shiny beetles poured from the holes in a rustling tide, covering the floor and walls. "Merlin's socks. How do we get through this?" Ron took an involuntary step back. "Fire," someone called, but a normal incendio wouldn't have the reach. Harry scanned for an angle. Hermione stepped forward, eyes sharp. She swung her wand at the densest part of the swarm. Hurricane devastation. A violent whirlwind rose, sucking the beetles into a revolving black sphere. Without hesitation, she whipped her wand and shouted, "Incendio!" Flames drove into the vortex, wind fed the fire, and the two combined into a roaring fire tornado that swept down the corridor. Scorching heat crashed past them as the inferno consumed the insects, leaving only acrid ash and the crackling detritus of burned beetle carapaces. 10 seconds later, the passage was clear. Even the usually sardonic Malfoy was momentarily lost for words. "Truly creative," he muttered. They entered the next stage, a vast hall filled with giant mirrors at odd angles. Light bent dizzyingly across the room, occasionally condensing into searing beams, and distorted magical phantoms lunged out from the reflections. "Light magic and phantoms, use vanishing charms," Hermione ordered, and cast a disillusionment charm on herself. Her outline blurred. making it harder for the light and phantoms to lock onto her. The others dodged the reflected beams while watching closely. Soon they realized the source was a ghost moving between mirrors deep in the hall. Harry fired a stupefy at it, but the spell rebounded from a mirror and made Malfoy duck. They stopped firing blindly. Breaking mirrors might release the spirit and make things worse. Instead, they waited for an opening, then several vanishing charms struck the ghost at once. It shrieked and dissolved. As it vanished, the mirror's strange behavior ceased. What had seemed like a complicated stage solved itself through calm, coordinated restraint. They left the quiet mirror hall for an even more oppressive chamber, a tomb bearing dozens of stone coffins and the rank scent of decay. Niches held clay jars containing unknown organs. As Goyle turned, the hem of his robe knocked a scarab-decorated jar off a plinth. It shattered, scattering its shriveled, blackened contents across the floor. As if a mechanism had been triggered, lids clattered, and the surrounding coffins burst open. Mummies wrapped in yellowing bandages creaked their stiff limbs free. Hollow sockets burned with green ghost flame as they rose and lurched toward the 5 students like the tide sensing live prey. It wasn't entirely Goyle's fault. The trap would have been activated the moment anyone stepped into the tomb with their left foot. The real test was only beginning. Chapter 254. Sphinx, Ron, and Draco reacted fastest, forming a defensive line at once. Impedimenta! Protego! Goyle roared and threw his bulk forward. The shield charm he cast met the first wave of mummies with dull thuds as it held them back, but there were too many, and the line quickly began to buckle. Hermione stepped up into the breach, taking on the role of striker. She drew a breath, her wand moving like a conductor's baton as she began to weave spells at a dazzling speed. Reducto! A white flash blew apart the nearest mummy. Incendio! Flames swallowed a small cluster to the right. Stupefy! A red beam froze another attacker mid-lunge. Definned bandages and desiccated limbs were ripped to shreds. She even had time to disarm a mummy, lifting a rusted weapon with a cool Expelliarmus. Spells of every color and effect streamed from her wand tip in a relentless cyclone, each one finding its mark. For a moment, the room was a cacophony of explosions, crackling fires, and the thud of bodies collapsing. Hermione hardly paused. Her prodigious reserves of magic and astonishing casting speed produced a terrifying suppressive barrage that shoved the mummies back. Ron and Goyle stood holding their wands, mouths open, forgetting to cast. Harry and Draco had to stop attacking and dodge the occasional mummy that slipped through the line, glancing incredulously at Hermione, who had been transformed into a spell machine gun. Relying on Hermione's barrage and everyone's support, they cleared the mummies and reached the altar at the heart of the temple. As they entered the altar chamber, a giant sphinx statue in the center came alive. The massive stone shifted with a grinding rumble and emitted a roar that made the floor tremble. It did not attack right away. Instead, its enormous, gem-encrusted, human-like eyes opened and fixed on them. "It's a sphinx," Hermione said. "Do we answer its riddles?" "If we answer correctly, maybe we don't have to fight," Ron offered. "Then we should answer," Harry said, and the others echoed him in near-perfect unison. "Suit yourselves," Hermione said flatly as they approached the statue. The Sphinx's stone gaze swept over them, and a deep, eerie voice issued from its mouth. "What creature walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening?" They all froze for a beat. That," Hermione answered immediately. "A human." "Correct," the Sphinx intoned. "Wait, why human?" Ron asked, puzzled. "I don't remember walking on 4 legs this morning," Goyle added, staring at his own feet. Hermione rolled her eyes and explained, a little impatiently, "It's symbolic. Morning is infancy, crawling. Noon is adulthood, walking on 2 legs. Evening is old age, walking with a cane." "Oh," they chorused, as if their faces had been illuminated by the answer. "Next question." The Sphinx's voice boomed again. 2 sisters. One gives birth to the other, and she, in turn, gives birth to the first. Who are they? They fell silent, thinking theatrically. This one's tricky. Day and night," Hermione supplied. "Of course," they all cried, though it was clear none of them had fully thought it through before simply accepting her answer. "Next question." The Sphinx continued. "What is something you want to share when you have it, but once you share it, you no longer have it?" They exchanged blank and theatrical looks, scratching heads, stroking chins. Hermione cut through it. A secret, she said. That makes sense. Exactly. I was going to say that, they chimed in, a little too eager. Next question. The Sphinx's tone was patient. I have nothing, yet I am as rich as a king. I am empty, yet everyone has me. What am I? There was a beat of silence. Harry murmured, Ron squinted, Goyle tried to look thoughtful, and Draco shrugged, nudging them to let Hermione answer. The sight of them all staring blankly at a riddle this simple pushed Hermione over the edge. She knew the answer. Nothing, but seeing their vacuous expressions made her incandescent with frustration. She couldn't stand the idea of explaining every puzzle to them. I don't know, she snapped, each word spat out through gritted teeth. Prepare to fight. Relief washed over the others, and with uncanny coordination they drew their wands. No sooner had Hermione declared the battle than the giant Sphinx lunged with savage force. Attack the joints, restrict its movement. Harry barked. Goyle left, Potter right. Draco was already assigning targets. Hermione, Ron, distract the head. Their teamwork was astonishing. When the Sphinx's lunge missed, Hermione seized the opening and struck at the vulnerable neck joint with a powerful freezing charm. Ice crawled across the stone, spreading rapidly. The Sphinx slowed, its movements becoming sluggish. Aim for the eyes, Petrificus totalis, Draco yelled, and a volley of body-bind curses struck the Sphinx's head. Its motions ground to a halt, and stone by stone it reverted to an inert statue, collapsing to the ground as a golden light signaled the task's completion. The chamber dissolved around them, and they found themselves back in the arena. That's enough for today, Hermione said, waving them off. I still have a history of magic essay to write. She left without looking back. Draco opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it and followed Goyle out. Well, Ron said after a moment, I have to admit, our cooperation was better than I expected today. Harry nodded and glanced down at the points display on his badge. At this rate, he said, we'll all be able to get what we want before the end of the school year. Harry and Ron, their bodies tired but still buzzing with excitement, trudged back into the Gryffindor common room. They hadn't even had a chance to sink into the soft armchairs when someone unexpected stopped them. Sargeras appeared silently by the fat lady's portrait hole, startling a cluster of first-years into scampering away. Mr. Potter, he said calmly. His voice wasn't loud, but it reached Harry clearly. Harry and Ron straightened at once. Professor? Sargeras wasted no pleasantries. He drew a slightly aged blank piece of parchment from his robe and held it out. This returned to its rightful owner. Harry took it in bewilderment. The instant his fingers touched the paper, familiar ink crawled across it. Messrs. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs are proud to present the Marauders Map. The Marauders Map. Harry's surprise was quickly followed by delight. He had almost forgotten the treasure Sargeras had once confiscated. It's still useful to me, he stammered, worried the professor might snatch it back. Sargeras's expression was grave. I know. I should apologize. I appear to have damaged its ability to conceal certain secrets, though its basic and most important functions remain intact. Oh, it's fine, Professor, Harry said, relief and a sudden understanding flooding him. Anyway, the staff pretty much know its secrets now. Sargeras inclined his head. It is yours, and I am returning it for that reason. Use it wisely. Do not limit it to sneaking out at night. With that, he nodded once and departed as quietly as he'd arrived, leaving Harry clutching the recovered map and feeling oddly unsettled and triumphant all at once. That same evening, Remus Lupin was at his modest office, tidying lesson plans, when a gentle knock sounded. Come in, he called. The door opened to reveal Sargeras. Professor Greengrass? Lupin greeted, a little surprised. Lupin's surprise melted into a warm, sincere smile. Please, come in. I didn't expect you. I've been meaning to thank you properly. You gave me a second life. There was gratitude in his voice. His eyes were brighter, the constant wariness that had once shadowed him noticeably absent. Sargeras took in the small room with a calm sweep of his gaze before focusing on Lupin. How are you adapting to your new body? Very well, Lupin said, scarcely able to hide his excitement. It's completely under control now. I feel better than I ever have. The full moons, what used to be torment, are now more like a significant enhancement. He paused, then added more practically, Of course, I still take the potion Severus prepares, just to be absolutely sure. Sargeras nodded, apparently satisfied. After a moment's silence, he went on. Professor Lupin, Call me Remus, Professor Greengrass, Lupin interrupted, smiling. Very well, I am not here merely to pay a courtesy call. Sargeras's tone was steady. I am formally inviting you to join an organization. Lupin's smile dimmed into surprise. An organization? I've never heard of it. You wouldn't have, Sargeras agreed. We operate discreetly. We pursue forgotten knowledge and deal with hidden dangers that standard channels either cannot or will not address. I believe your skills, your experience, and your outlook after being given this new life align well with our aims. He let the words sink in. You are no longer a werewolf, and you now possess heightened physical capabilities and reflexes. Bronzefeather needs specialists, people who can handle fieldwork and complex, delicate threats. We can offer you a wider platform, like-minded colleagues, sufficient funding, and, if it matters to you, an unlimited supply of wolfsbane potion that actually tastes normal. Lupin was taken aback. He had never expected such an offer, especially not from the man who'd altered his life. A secret organization, his mind flashed to the Order of the Phoenix, but the resources Sargeras implied and the authority of the man himself made the prospect feel very different. His whole life, he had fought darkness and longed for acceptance and the chance to make a real difference. Now an opportunity, offered personally by the one who had saved him, lay before him. He could not honestly imagine returning to a bleak future of hard labor at the docks. Before hesitation could take root, determination settled over his features. He drew a steady breath and replied, solemnly, I'll join. Professor Greengrass, thank you for your trust. Whether to repay your kindness or to pursue the greater aims you've described, I will give everything I have. Sargeras had expected no other answer. Very good. At the next gathering, I will introduce you to the others. Be prepared, Remus. With that, he turned and left. Lupin watched him go, a strange, unexpected tapestry of possibility unfurling before him. Sargeras's invitation was no impulse. Remus Lupin brought a unique combination of expertise and circumstance. Influenced by his father Lyle Lupin, Remus had devoted considerable study to creatures such as boggarts and other fear-based entities, an unusual, specialized knowledge that made him almost unrivaled in that niche. After Sargeras's magical reshaping, Lupin had been freed from the curse of the full moon and endowed with superior physical abilities and reactions, making him a formidable operative in the field. For an organization that sought to confront covert threats and handle delicate missions beyond the scope of conventional methods, someone with Lupin's skills, experience, and renewed purpose was exactly the kind of ally they needed. Hermione Granger reappeared at the edge of the floating arena in a flash of white light. She staggered a step, then steadied herself, sweat beading at her temples and her brow tightly furrowed. The confident gleam she usually wore after solving a problem was gone, replaced by an unfamiliar anxiety. She had just faced a dark wizard's mirror image, one skilled at mental interference and stealthy strikes, and it had gone worse than any of her previous attempts. She hadn't even been able to mount an effective counterattack before being overwhelmed by a torrent of subtle, relentless tactics. No, she murmured, wand idly tracing the air, eyes unfocused. The shield charm's strength is fine, but it can't stop his repeated sneak attacks. My attack spells are powerful, but the casting movements are too obvious. He always dodges ahead of time or distracts me with trash talk. There isn't a single spell that handles both lightning-fast ambushes and sustained mental assault at once. She put her wand away and made her way toward the great hall, lost in thought. For days now, this had become her routine. She almost didn't notice Sargeras brush past until she looked up, as if searching the air for an answer. When her eyes met his, she seized on him like someone clinging to a lifeline. Professor, I've gone through the complete guide to common dark arts and their counterspells, the adaptive evolution of defensive magic, even your advanced magical topology, she blurted. But no single book has a perfect solution. Every countermeasure has its weaknesses. Are we just supposed to memorize every dangerous pattern and then hope the next attack fits what we've pre-studied? Frustration colored her voice, an emotion she rarely let herself feel. Sargeras didn't offer comfort or a ready answer. He spoke slowly, calmly. Miss Granger, books record the wisdom of the past. They're not a prison for your thoughts, nor a universal answer to every future danger. He paused, then added, your enemy will not politely attack you chapter by chapter according to a spellbook's table of contents. So what do you mean? She asked. Sargeras watched the puzzlement on her face for a moment before he said, if the shields you have aren't strong enough, and the swords you have aren't sharp enough, why is your first instinct to look for older shields and swords in books instead of trying to forge your own? He walked away without another word. Hermione stood rooted to the spot. His remark was a cold key that pried open a door in her mind she had never thought to push. She had devoted herself to mastering existing knowledge. She knew about creation in theory, and she had been told the concept before. It had always seemed like a thing for masters, Dumbledore, Flitwick, not someone like her. But Sargeras's words, striking against the raw frustration of recent defeats, sparked a dangerous, exhilarating thought. True power wasn't only how much known magic you'd learned, but whether you had the ability and courage to confront the unknown. If the current magical system had gaps, why couldn't she be the one to fill them? Once the idea took hold, it would not be suppressed. Hermione attacked the problem with a new purpose. She stopped simply cramming spells and began to research and deconstruct with intent the architecture of spells, how the smallest angle in a wand motion guided the flow of magic, how the vibration of each syllable shaped an effect, the precise ratio of focused will to magical output. She spent days and nights poring over ancient runes, the micro-influences of glyphs on magical formation, and the fragmentary notes of famous spellmakers in the restricted section. Occasionally, Professor Flitwick offered quiet guidance. She even tried to reverse engineer thought processes from those scattered records. It was far harder than rote learning. Her introductory texts and notebooks wore thin. There were failures, small explosions when combination spells slipped control, carefully designed effects warping into something unexpected or even opposite, headaches and bone-deep magical exhaustion from sustained concentration. Each failure, though, taught her something essential. After a period of punishing refinement, she found, to her delight, that she could begin to grasp the deeper mechanics behind many basic spells and coax two or more spells to work together, producing effects greater than the sum of their parts, like when she fused Hurricane Devastation and Incendio. That achievement wasn't enough. She wanted to go further, to design a wholly original spell from scratch. One afternoon, she sat in a quiet corner of the library, buried beneath a mountain of tomes, magical structure, the essence of magic, ancient runes and spell analysis, and furiously scribbled runic equations and models on parchment. Her quill flew. She kept rubbing a sore spot above her temple. You look like you're trying to write magic as if it were a formula, an ethereal voice said beside her. Hermione looked up. Luna Lovegood stood there, dreamy-eyed as always. Next to her, Astoria Greengrass peered at Hermione's stack of books with quiet curiosity. Luna, Astoria, Hermione said, massaging her throbbing head. No, just trying some things. You're trying to create magic, aren't you? Luna said as plainly as if she were asking what Hermione had for breakfast. How did you? Hermione began. Luna smiled faintly. There are little sparks of magic around you from failed experiments. They look confused and keep trying to find their way back to you. That's amazing, Luna added. My mother used to do that too. Your mother? Hermione asked. Luna's usual hazy expression shifted briefly into something sorrowful before drifting back. She died in a magical experiment, an accident. Hermione felt a cold drop in her stomach. Luna, I'm so sorry. Oh, it's all right. Luna shook her head gently. She wasn't sad at the end. She must have seen something beautiful. My father says exploring the mysteries of magic always carries risk, but that shouldn't stop us from looking. Her voice held no regret, only a quiet, strange courage. Astoria's tone was soft but earnest. Creating your own magic, that's extraordinary. Hermione, I can't imagine the depth of knowledge and courage it would take. Hermione felt warmed by their reactions. Luna's words in particular didn't frighten her. They lent a curious sense of mission. She hesitated, then asked Astoria a question she'd been holding back. Astoria, do you know anything about Professor Greengrass's past? What was he like in your family? When did he begin creating his own magic? Astoria hadn't expected the question. She paused, then answered cautiously. I don't know everything. By the time I was born, he had already been at Hogwarts for years. Everyone says he never returned to the Greengrass estate after he took up his work. She frowned slightly. The family elders talk about him harshly, call him unconventional, say he sullied the family name and brought shame, but I think that's only because they couldn't control him. She looked at Hermione, and the book spread before her with something like respect. The professor I know is calm and powerful. He's doing important work. Maybe that's why he chose to help you. Hermione nodded, feeling some of the loneliness of her project lift. Astoria's words added another piece to her picture of Sagres, a solitary pioneer walking his own road. She bent back over her parchments, eyes burning with renewed determination, and set to work again on those complex formulas and runic structures. 257. Chapter 257, Gan. At breakfast, the smells of coffee and toast filled the high table. The Quidditch finals had ended 2 days ago, and a faint, exhausted afterglow still hung over the Great Hall, making the morning unusually calm, until Professor Flitwick, bursting with excitement about a new waterproof and pest-repellent charm he was describing to Professor Sprout, knocked his coffee. The scalding liquid tipped toward Professor McGonagall's half-graded stack of Transfiguration essays. Her eyes widened, weeks of work on the verge of being ruined. Sagres tapped the table without looking up. The spill froze mid-arc, the coffee hovering an inch above the parchments. A hush fell over the entire high table. Sagres glanced at the suspended mess, then pointed at the cup. The coffee reversed course as if played backward and flowed cleanly back into Flitwick's cup. Not a drop touched the essays. "Oh, Minerva, I'm so sorry. I got too excited." Flitwick apologized, flustered, checking frantically that nothing had been harmed. McGonagall sighed with relief, adjusted her glasses, and gave Sagres a stiff nod. "Thank you, Sagres." "You're welcome," he said flatly, and went on eating his toast. Snape snorted almost inaudibly from the side, muttering, "Show off." A group of first-year Ravenclaws had wandered by and caught the whole thing. They stared, gaping, from the animated Flitwick to the expressionless Sagres, then at the restored cup. "Professor," one timid voice began. A slightly bolder girl, eyes bright, asked, "What was that? Can we learn it?" Sagres looked at the children with the same blank expression. Just as McGonagall expected him to brush them off, he said, "It's the 200-point spell, fourth from the bottom in the exchange catalog. Not very practical for beginners." The first years blinked. Flitwick, meanwhile, couldn't contain his enthusiasm. Exquisite magical control. Children, it's all about precision, instantly analyzing the trajectory, shape, and state, then fixing it with the smallest possible intervention. Not brute force. Calmness is essential. Snape cut him off smoothly. "If you haven't even mastered the levitation charm, this is premature. It's like asking a troll to understand celestial mechanics. Go copy the first chapter of the Standard Book of Spells, grade 1 5 times. Maybe that will expand your meager brain capacity." The Ravenclaws recoiled from Snape's sarcasm and hurried away, peering back excitedly as they went. "You scared them, Severus," Professor Sprout chided gently. Snape shrugged, spooning up some oatmeal. "Just keeping them from getting fanciful notions that magic needs no foundation." He didn't look at Sagres when he said it, but his meaning was clear. McGonagall shook her head. "Sargeras's foundation is probably not what we ordinarily mean," she murmured, then turned to Snape. "Is Mr. Malfoy feeling any better?" "Still in the hospital wing," Snape replied coldly. Draco had injured his arm in the Quidditch game 2 days earlier. Snape had given him 2 days off and privately handed him 2 of his old spell manuscripts. "Does lying in bed help an arm recover?" Sagres asked without lifting his head. Snape snorted and wouldn't respond. At the Gryffindor table a few rows away, Harry, Ron, and Hermione had watched the whole episode. "Did you see that?" Wandless, silent casting, one of the younger Gryffindors whispered in awe. "That spell must be exchangeable," another added dreamily. Ron, halfway through a sausage, muttered to Harry and Hermione, "So when are we going to dueling club today? Is Malfoy still not better?" He swallowed and went on. "If you ask me, he's faking it. Just a scrape, and he's been in the hospital wing for 2 days? Madame Pomfrey could fix that in a moment. He's just slacking off to avoid class." "He wants to slow us down," Ron grumbled. Harry shrugged and poured himself some pumpkin juice. Who knows, but without him and Goyle, we don't have very good, what did he call them, meat shields on the wrong side of the pitch. He corrected himself with a mischievous smile. Hermione frowned, stirring her porridge absently. Her mind was elsewhere. Ron ignored her and pushed on. Snape must have given him a fake medical note. Yesterday in potions, Snape looked at Malfoy's injury like he'd found his long-lost son. He lowered his voice and did a spot-on imitation of Snape's oily tone. Mr. Malfoy, given your unfortunate condition, for today's swelling solution, you may complete only the theoretical portion. Merlin, if we were a minute late, he'd want to string us up at the dungeon entrance. Harry couldn't help laughing. Come on, Ron. Snape's like that with everyone. He's just a bit more lenient with Slytherins and extra strict with us. A bit? Ron scoffed. When he grades Slytherin essays, I bet his quills are gold-plated. Ron, keep your voice down. Hermione hissed, suddenly alert. Ron, still sputtering, kept going. He should be in the hospital wing himself. Professor Lupin really shouldn't have let him cover. He probably doesn't even know what a syllabus is. Their conversation drew an icy voice from behind them that seemed to drop the temperature 10 degrees. It seems, Mr. Weasley, that you have an extraordinary interest in your professor's teaching methods. Harry, Ron, and Hermione felt every hair on their necks stand up. Ron's fork clattered to his plate. His face went as white as the milk. They turned slowly. Snape loomed behind them like a dark statue, eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint in them, and a terrifyingly fake smile on his face. Not only that, he continued, you three also appear to have a strong opinion on the school's medical decisions and appointments. Professor Snape, Ron began, floundering. You were caught bad-mouthing me behind my back. Again, Snape said coldly. I'm honored that my superior intellect provides such rich conversation during your meal. Hermione pressed her fingers to her forehead, helpless. Snape stepped closer, his tall form almost enclosing the two boys. Clearly, Gryffindor's hourglass must pay the price for certain people's uncontrolled tongues. He smiled sarcastically. Because you'd rather waste your energies criticizing professors far more learned and powerful than yourselves than think about how to improve your abysmal potions grades. 20 points from each of you, he announced. Detention tonight at 8. Location, the dungeons. I trust there will be plenty of rat intestines and frog entrails waiting for two profound thinkers. Satisfied at the sight of their cowering faces, he swept his black robes and said, Now, vanish from my sight at once, and do accept my congratulations on your contribution to Slytherin's House Cup. Under the sympathetic stares of their classmates, the three of them fled the Great Hall. Chapter 258, Wolf Owl. The Forbidden Forest was unnaturally quiet that night, as if even the wind were trying not to disturb the clearing around the hidden safe house. Sargeras pushed open the heavy wooden door and ushered Remus Lupin inside. The fire in the hearth leapt to life, chasing away the damp chill of the woods with a warm glow. Around a long, sturdy table, 7 or 8 figures had been waiting. Some were wrapped in hooded robes and sat half hidden in shadow. Others wore casual muggle clothes and looked as comfortable as if they were at a club meeting instead of in a magically concealed refuge. When the door shut, every pair of eyes turned as one. Several stares fixed on the slightly flustered Lupin, making him feel as if an invisible hand had thoroughly examined him. Sargeras took the chair at the head of the table and motioned for Lupin to sit beside him. He swept the room with a calm gaze and said in a low, even voice, "A new member." No one reacted with surprise. Clearly the news had preceded him. Lupin thought, not for the first time, that this group operated with a discipline and discretion far beyond what he'd expected. Sargeras then asked, "Would anyone like to introduce the new member?" "Me, I will." A crisp, bright voice cut through the hush. Kestrel sprang up, grinning, almost bubbling over with enthusiasm. Lupin silently labeled her excitable, an odd personality in a group that otherwise felt solemn. "Welcome aboard. I'm Kestrel, though you can call me Lumina. Don't be nervous. Everyone here thinks alike. We're all very easy to get along with." Lupin nodded politely. Kestrel turned to the rest of the table and introduced them in quick, lively succession. "This is Nightingale, a potions master. She teaches potions at Beauxbatons and can brew anything you need." Nightingale inclined her head at Lupin. He returned the gesture, thinking, so she must be the wolfsbane supplier Sargeras mentioned. A potions professor at Beauxbatons, yet she looked scarcely older than a graduate. Had she used some regressive potion? This is Robin, from the International Magical Transportation Department. No flu route or portkey record escapes her notice. If she chooses, altering those records is simpler than eating and drinking. A competent-looking woman gave Lupin a slight nod. He wondered whether she possessed high-level authority or other means to manipulate transport records so freely. Thunderbird, Dean at Ilvermorny. He's a master wandmaker and knows everything about North American magical creatures. A dignified older man inclined his head. Lupin felt relieved to see someone who fit the image of a traditional elder. Stork, from the United Wizarding Gazette. He always knows about big events before they happen. A thin young man adjusted his glasses and nodded without expression. Lupin wondered whether he was an editor or a reporter. Miss Snow Owl, Kestrel continued, a very successful businesswoman. If you need something that can't be obtained by ordinary means, she'll find it. Very wealthy, too. An elegant woman acknowledged Lupin with a graceful wave. Her wealth, Lupin realized, likely came with deep connections and unconventional methods. Swift, Kestrel added, the best curse breaker at Gringotts. Ancient curses and malicious seals are child's play to him. A red-haired young man, his braid tied to a wolf-tail charm, chuckled. Kestrel, don't exaggerate, he said as he greeted Lupin and leaned casually against his chair. Lupin filed him away as a Gringotts cursebreaker with experience in ruins and artifacts. Hummingbird, Dean of St. Mungo's, Kestrel finished. With her on your side, it's practically having an extra life. A gentle-looking woman offered Lupin a warm smile. His surprise at seeing the new Dean of St. Mungo's present was tempered by the thought that this group truly was a gathering of elites from across the wizarding world. Though smaller in number than the Order of the Phoenix, each member here had influence and expertise in their own sphere. Any one of them could cause ripples across the magical community. Sargeras's voice cut through Lupin's thoughts. As per custom, choose a code name for yourself or use your real name. Lupin felt the room's attention on him. After a moment's thought, he said, Wolf Owl. My code name is Wolf Owl. It was a small compromise, an acknowledgement of his past and his desire to move forward. Kestrel clapped delightedly. All right, the serious business is over, she proclaimed, whipping a shimmering crystal ball and a stack of dark red tarot cards from her pocket with theatrical flourish. Welcome gift for new members. Wolf Owl, let's see what the mists hold for you. She settled opposite him and set the crystal between them. The others watched with mild curiosity. Even Sargeras's expression softened with a hint of interest. Kestrel's fingers glided over the glass, and she murmured a soft, indistinct incantation. Lupin, who had always been skeptical of divinations, thought she had the air of a showman, but when she opened her eyes, her expression was suddenly serious. Oh dear, she said, the tarot covenant suits you better. Her pronouncement drew an amused roll of eyes from some, but she ignored them, closing her eyes and concentrating as she shuffled the heavy cards. The only sounds were the fire in the hearth and the soft rustle of paper. After a long pause, she opened her eyes and 4 cards rose and flew into place in front of Lupin, as if by their own will. The Hanged Man, she read first. Sacrifice, waiting, seeing the world from another angle, a reflection of your past. She flipped the second card. The Moon, illusion, fear, turmoil of the subconscious, and untamed bestial instincts, an ongoing theme, an eternal challenge for you. Kestrel hesitated slightly as she revealed the third. The Tower, she said quietly. Sudden upheaval and destruction, foundations shaken to dust, but also the chance to rebuild. Finally, she placed the 4th card over the tower and frowned. Death. On the card, a skeletal rider bearing a banner sat astride a white horse, a harbinger of inevitable endings. Kestrel's brow knit. Your future is tied to an ending. It could be the death of a body or the collapse of an old order, a forced conclusion of this stage of life. But something's off. She lowered her voice, puzzled. The imagery has been interfered with, blurred by some force. Still, tarot is never precise. Perhaps this reading is destiny itself hesitating. Lupin was surprised. He had expected trifle or theatrics. Instead, Kestrel had offered something that felt uncomfortably true. The image of the death card lingered in his mind. Sargeras drew him back to the present. Very well. Now introduce yourself, Wolf Owl. Lupin stood and spoke plainly. I am Remus John Lupin. I teach defense against the dark arts at Hogwarts. I was once a werewolf, but thanks to Professor Greengrass, I no longer have the monthly transformations. To keep my mind clear, however, I still require a regular supply of wolfsbane potion. He chose honesty. Here, among people who operated under codenames but met in true form, candor seemed the wisest course. No one reacted with shock. Nightingale's voice came smoothly from across the table. My alchemy lab maintains long-term preparations of many high-grade potions, she said. If you need a steady supply of wolfsbane, I can provide it free of charge. Lupin blinked, then gave a quick, grateful nod. Around the table, the members welcomed him, some with nods, others with small smiles, and for the first time since he'd entered the forest, Lupin felt the tightness in his chest loosen a little. Furthermore, Nightingale added, turning to Sargeras, I've finished analyzing several of Nicholas Flamel's core alchemical manuscripts. I can now brew the elixir of life on my own. The room tightened. A barely perceptible glint passed across everyone's faces. Even Lupin found himself holding his breath. The elixir of life? Were they really operating at that level? Sargeras inclined his head. Very good. I will provide you with the Philosopher's Stone later, but its use must be strictly controlled, and all related information kept confidential to avoid unnecessary trouble. For now, only Thunderbird will be allowed access to the elixir of life within the organization. Heads nodded around the table. Even the usually composed Thunderbird allowed himself the smallest of smiles. The elixir of life, an obsession that had ruined so many lives, was suddenly within reach. Lupin sat quietly, his thoughts churning. The Philosopher's Stone, Nicholas Flamel's? The bronze feather ran far deeper than he had imagined. Sargeras's voice drew him back. Lupin, because of your background and abilities, I have a task for you. Tell me, Lupin said. Sargeras's gaze fixed on him, calm and low. Your past can be the bridge we need to reach a group that the magical community fears and shuns. You no longer belong to them, but you understand them better than anyone. I want you to go in as an observer and find those among the werewolf communities who haven't been completely consumed by darkness, those who are still worth saving. Lupin felt his chest tighten. He understood. I understand, he said solemnly. Don't rush, Sargeras advised. Such people are rare. Be cautious, especially of an organization called the Blood Moon Alliance. If possible, gather everything you can about them, their members, meeting places, and so on. Lupin agreed. Sargeras then placed a bronze feather emblem in his palm. It was slightly warm, a faint red light pulsing across its surface as if it had a heartbeat. After briefly explaining its uses, he shifted his attention to Stork, who adjusted his glasses. Any international developments? Sargeras asked. A few, Stork said. The Quidditch World Cup will take place in a few months. More importantly, Cornelius Fudge has persuaded several key members of the International Confederation of Wizards and the Ministers of Magic of Bulgaria and France. They've largely agreed to restart the Tri-Wizard tournament next year. Hogwarts has been chosen as the venue. The news stirred the room. Kestrel's eyes lit up. Hogwarts? Fantastic! It'll be so lively! Robin analyzed quietly. That means international flu connections and portkey use will spike over the next few months. The British ministry will be under a lot of pressure. Miss Snow Owl clasped her hands elegantly. I need to acquire a batch of live whoopers, adult birds if possible. Does anyone have a lead? Price is no object. Swift raised an eyebrow. Whoopers are rare and dangerous. What do you need them for? Business, Miss Snow Owl replied with a smile and no further explanation. Swift remembered something and offered, I found droppings from a similar dark creature in an ancient tomb in the Congo. I can follow up when I have time. Thank you, Miss Snow Owl said, pleased. Conversation drifted until Sargeras's eyes landed on the women at the table. Nightingale, Snowy Owl, Hummingbird, and Kestrel. He offered something that immediately piqued their interest. Not long ago, I devised a charm that can permanently fix a recipient's appearance in its current state. No potions or other external measures needed. Their attention snapped to him. Even the reserved Nightingale leaned forward. Is that true? Robin asked, incredulous and eager. Sargeras nodded. Miss Snow Owl's smile turned cautious. What's the price? Do we have to feed on blood regularly or something? Sargeras blinked, then replied evenly, "You won't need to drink blood, but the recipient will lose the ability to perform any human transfiguration magic on themselves, permanently. That includes a metamorph magus's spontaneous transformations. Those abilities would become fixed, and the person would no longer be able to change their appearance at will." The effect of that cold truth was immediate. The initial excitement drained from the women's faces, and disappointment settled over them. Hummingbird was first to speak. "As a healer, I can't accept giving up any magical potential permanently for youth, no matter how tempting." Snowy Owl sighed. "Eternal youth is tempting, but if it means losing the possibility of voluntary transformation, it isn't worth it." Kestrel slumped back in her chair. "I'll pass too. Not being able to change, how dull." Sargeras looked at her with interest. "Are you a metamorph magus?" Kestrel hesitated, then admitted, "No, but I am an animagus." Several voices chorused with amused reproach. "That's illegal." Kestrel shrugged. "So what? I'm careful and rarely use it." Thunderbird's curiosity got the better of him. "What's your animagus form?" Kestrel brightened for a moment, then shook her head with a grin. "I'm not telling." Chapter 260, Sargeras. "I don't know what you're pretending." After that, everyone exchanged a few scattered reports about recent developments in the magical world, and the tension in the safe house slowly eased. When Sargeras saw the meeting had run its course, he announced it was over. The members rose and left silently, their badges guiding them out. Under the hazy moonlight, Sargeras and Lupin walked back toward Hogwarts. The Forbidden Forest was far from still at night. Unseen creatures rustled in the undergrowth, and owls hooted in the distance. Moonlight filtered through the tangled branches, casting mottled shadows between the trees. They were passing through an old stand of oaks when the burbling of a stream grew louder. Just as they reached it, a strange sight stopped them. By the water, a centaur lay on his back, muscular form slack and motionless, his chest no longer rising. A slender, pale figure was hunched over his neck, making a soft, suppressed sucking sound as he fed on the centaur's blood. At the sound of footsteps, the figure lifted his head. Pale face, elegant posture, he was a vampire. He stood slowly, as composed as a disturbed noble rather than a predator caught in the act. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and regarded them with a flicker of surprise that turned quickly into cold, contemptuous appraisal. "A wizard, and a rather uniquely scented wizard," he rasped. His accent was odd, his tone repellent. "Leave, my feast does not require an audience." "You've crossed a line," Sargeras said. "Crossed the line?" The vampire sneered, baring sharp fangs. "Code? Laws?" He shrugged. "Your so-called boundaries are just chains cowards impose on themselves. As for codes, survival of the fittest is the only rule that matters." He gestured at them as if shooing flies. "This centaur's blood is hot and strong. It is an honor to be his prey." He licked his fangs, considering. "The bodily fluids of those acromantula are pungent and hard to stomach. Unicorn blood? Nasty, burning, poisonous. But centaurs." He kicked the corpse at his feet with a hint of admiration. "Warrior's blood, hot, vigorous, far richer than the bland, tasteless blood of muggles. A rare vintage." His crimson eyes swept over Sargeras and Lupin, hunger sharpening into malice. "What I most hope for, though, is to find a few lost little treats. Hogwarts students, magic and youth mixed in their veins. Now that would be a supreme delicacy." "Then why don't you go to Hogwarts and catch a couple?" Sargeras asked with the barest expression. The vampire's face flickered with a momentary wariness, but he quickly recovered his haughty grin. He ignored the question and instead probed them. "Heh! Are you poachers? Hogsmeade locals?" Then he lowered his voice, cajoling. "Since you're here, you must have connections. If you could provide a few young wizards, first years, fresh, pure magic, I'd pay you an unimaginable sum of galleons, or offer you ancient artifacts you couldn't obtain elsewhere." Sargeras watched him for a beat, half smiling. After 2 seconds, his voice went flat. "I'm afraid you'll be disappointed, Miss Vampire. We are professors at Hogwarts." The vampire's greed only grew. He licked his lips eagerly. "Professors? Oh, perfect. Even better. The children trust you. So very simple to arrange. We could make this a long-term arrangement." "You misunderstand." Sargeras interrupted, contempt no longer hidden. He looked the vampire up and down as if appraising a piece of filth. "I didn't give you my identity to negotiate. I gave it to show you how stupid your idea is." Do you know, the vampire purred, advancing with a smile. I've always wanted to taste real wizard blood. Tonight I might finally get that chance. Sargeras's wand, crafted from everlasting flowerwood, slid silently into his palm. You probably won't taste wizard blood. You'll taste something else. His voice was steady. Oh, and what would that be? The vampire asked, curious. Death. The vampire's red eyes flared as his last pretenses fell away. With a snarl, he blurred into motion, a pale shape borne on a foul gust, lunging with a speed almost unseen. Sargeras flicked his wand calmly. A condensed, silvery white surge of light erupted, forming an impenetrable wall between them. The vampire hit it full force, sent flying backward faster than he had come, and crashed into a mound of fallen leaves with a heavy thud. His triumphant grin vanished, replaced by shock that quickly turned to panic. Just me, he gasped. Sargeras spoke each word like a carved blade. Now, are you ready to taste something other than wizard blood? A distant, invisible magic seized the vampire's throat like an iron clamp, hoisting him off the ground and slamming him against a nearby tree. He flailed, powerless. Sargeras stepped forward, wand steady, eyes cold. I didn't intend to interfere, he said evenly. That is, if you had been sensible and left when warned. Wait, I am, the vampire spluttered. You brought this on yourself. Sargeras gave him no more chance. He raised his wand and brought it down in a swift motion. A pure light burst from the tip, engulfing the restrained vampire. He screamed, a sound of tearing agony, and his body charred like dry paper. In moments, he was only ash, drifting to the forest floor and scattering into the undergrowth. Silence reclaimed the stream. Sargeras tilted his head, glancing at Lupin, who had stayed alert the entire time. This is the typical arrogance of long-lived dark creatures, he said. They always underestimate the power of those with short lives and mistake restraint for weakness. Lupin watched Sargeras lower his hand as though he'd crushed an insect. The two crossed to the fallen centaur. Lupin crouched, examined the body, and shook his head. He's dead. Sargeras nodded. He mouthed a few quiet spells, clearing and cleansing the immediate area, then placed the centaur's remains neatly in a sheltered bush and covered them with branches and fallen leaves. I'll inform the herd so they can recover their kin, he said in a normal voice. Let's go, he added, and they continued back toward Hogwarts.